Dead. Are you sure? I asked my father, my hand trembling over the speaker button as I sat at my kitchen island. On the other end of the line, I heard him and my mother clinking what sounded like champagne glasses. Finally gone, he laughed, his voice booming with a sickening kind of joy. The old miser kicked the bucket this morning. My father had no idea that the dead man was sitting directly across from me, stirring his oatmeal and listening to every single word. That morning, I did not just open the electronic gate to my estate, I opened the door to their absolute destruction. My name is Jasmine, and at 28 years old, I never expected to be the executioner of my own parents' greed. But when you are raised by wolves, you learn to bite back. Before I tell you how a bowl of oatmeal ended a family dynasty, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever held a secret that changed everything. The morning had started perfectly in my quiet estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The winter sun was just hitting the frost on the windows, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen. My grandfather Elijah sat across from me. At 85, he was still sharp as a tack, though he moved a little slower these days. He was the only family who had ever truly loved me. To my parents, Robert and Linda, he was just a walking bank account that refused to die fast enough. When my phone rang at 8:30 displaying my father's name, I felt a familiar knot of dread in my stomach. I answered, and the first thing I heard was not a greeting, but a celebration. "Jasmine." "He is dead," my father announced. I froze. I looked at Grandpa Elijah, who paused with his spoon halfway to his mouth. He looked at me, his blue eyes confused but very much alive. I slowly pressed the speaker button and placed the phone on the marble counter. "Are you sure, Dad?" I asked again, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Oh, I am sure." I heard my mother giggling in the background, nasty and shrill. "We just got the call from the care facility. Heart attack, they said. Quick and painless. Which is more than he deserves after holding out on us for so long." The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. Grandpa Elijah did not say a word. He just set his spoon down and leaned in closer to the phone, his face hardening into a mask of pure disappointment. He had suspected his son was greedy, but hearing your own child celebrate your death is a different kind of pain. "So what happens now?" I asked, watching Grandpa closely. "We need you to open the main gate at the estate," my father demanded, his tone shifting from joyful to commanding. "We are coming over to secure the assets. We need to find the will before the lawyers get involved. Your mother and I are already in the car. We will be there in 20 minutes. Do not let anyone else in, Jasmine. This is family business." He was not grieving, he was looting. He thought he was racing against time to grab what he could before the official channels locked him out. He had no idea he was racing toward his own ruin. Grandpa Elijah reached for the notepad we kept by the fruit bowl. His hand was steady as he pulled a pen from his pocket. I watched the ink flow across the paper in his distinctive, elegant script. He wrote just 3 words: "Open the gate." He pushed the paper toward me and nodded. His expression was not angry, it was final. It was the look of a man who had run out of second chances. I looked at the phone, then back at the man who had raised me when my parents were too busy chasing status. I took a deep breath. "Yes, I understand," I said into the phone, my tone icy. "The gate will be open. See you soon." I ended the call. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Grandpa went back to his oatmeal, calm as a frozen lake. "They think they are coming for an inheritance," I said quietly. Grandpa looked up, and for the first time that morning, a small, dangerous smile played on his lips. "No, Jasmine," he said. "They are coming for a lesson." The call my father received was not an administrative error. It was a trap laid with surgical precision. 3 days ago, Grandpa Elijah and I sat in this very kitchen plotting the demise of his relationship with his son. We knew Robert and Linda never visited the care facility where Grandpa supposedly stayed for rehabilitation, They only paid the bills, and even then they were usually late. So we had a friend from the facility administration call my father's personal line and leave a voicemail. We knew he would not call back to verify details or offer condolences. He would not want to risk being asked to pay for funeral arrangements or outstanding medical bills. We banked on his greed overriding his diligence. We were right. He did not even wait for a death certificate. He just heard the word gone and saw dollar signs. We did not have much time. I took the empty oatmeal bowl to the sink and rinsed it quickly, erasing the evidence of the living. Grandpa stood up. His movements were deliberate and dignified. He smoothed his cardigan and gripped his cane. There was a fire in his eyes that I had not seen in years. For a decade, he had made excuses for them. He had bailed them out of failed business ventures and covered their country club dues, hoping they would eventually mature. Today, that hope was dead. We walked out of the kitchen and down the long hallway to the library. The estate was silent, a museum of old money and older secrets. The library was my favorite room, smelling of leather and old paper. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves lined every wall. To an outsider, it was just an impressive collection of literature. To us, it was a fortress. I walked to the section on European history and reached for a specific leather-bound volume on the third shelf. I tilted the spine of Dante's Inferno 45 degrees to the right. A soft pneumatic hiss broke the silence. The entire heavy oak section of the bookcase swung inward, revealing a steel-reinforced door. This was the panic room installed during the Cold War scare of the 60s and modernized by me just last month. I ushered Grandpa inside. The space was compact but comfortable, equipped with an independent ventilation system and enough supplies to last a week. But the most important feature was the wall of monitors. I flipped a switch and the screens flickered to life. 12 high-definition feeds covered every square inch of the property. We could see the driveway, the foyer, the grand salon, the master bedroom, and even the inside of the wall safe in the study. The audio feeds hummed with static, waiting for sound. It was a panopticon of judgment. I pulled out the leather command chair for him. He sat down heavily, his eyes scanning the screens. On monitor 1, we saw the iron gates at the end of the driveway swinging open. A black Range Rover sped through, kicking up gravel in its wake. They were driving fast, too fast for a grieving family. "Are you sure you want to watch this?" I asked him, my hand resting on his shoulder. "Once you see this, you cannot unsee it. It will not be just greed, Grandpa. It will be hatred. It will be ugly." Elijah adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, staring at the screen where his son's car was approaching the main entrance. His face was a mask of sorrow hardening into resolve. He looked up at me, and his voice was steady, like stone grinding against stone. "I need to know, Jasmine. I need to know what they really are when they think no one is watching. I want to see when I am dead if they are humans or if they are beasts." I nodded, understanding the necessity of his pain. I stepped back out into the library. The bookcase swung shut with a solid click, sealing him inside the walls. He was now a ghost in his own home. I took a deep breath, smoothed my black dress, and checked my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were dry, but they needed to look hollow. I walked to the foyer just as the heavy front doors burst open. It was time to let the wolves in. The heavy oak doors did not just open, they were thrown wide as if breached by a battering ram. My mother Linda strode across the threshold first, and the sight of her nearly took my breath away for all the wrong reasons. There was no somber black, no modest gray, no sign of mourning whatsoever. She was wearing a fire-engine red cocktail dress, tight enough to be a second skin paired with stilettos that clicked sharply against the marble floor. She looked like she was arriving at a red carpet premiere, not the home of her supposedly deceased father-in-law. Behind her came my father Robert, already shouting instructions into his phone about liquidating assets, and trailing them was the final member of this grotesque circus, my younger sister Keisha. Keisha did not even look at me. Her face was illuminated by the harsh glow of a portable ring light clipped to her phone. She was holding the device at a high angle, pouting her lips in a practiced expression of tragedy. "Hey guys," she whispered to her screen, her voice trembling with a performance worthy of an award. "We just arrived at Grandpa's estate. It is so hard being here. The vibes are just so heavy. Please drop a heart in the chat for our family." She paused to check her view count, her grief vanishing instantly as she muttered about poor signal strength. They did not ask where his body was. They did not ask how it happened. They did not ask if I was okay. My mother breezed past me, her perfume cloying and expensive. "Where's the master key?" she demanded, her eyes scanning the foyer, as if calculating the auction value of the chandelier. "We need to get into the wall safe in the study before the coroner arrives. Robert, make sure you check the desk drawers." I stepped in front of the hallway that led to Grandpa Elijah's private suite. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it burned. "You are not going in there," I said, my voice low and firm. "Have you no respect? He is not even cold yet, and you are already picking the bones." My father stopped. He hung up his call and looked at me with a sneer that twisted his face into something unrecognizable. "Respect," he spat, stepping into my personal space. "Respect is for people who leave their money to their family, not hoard it like dragons. Now get out of my way, Jasmine. I am the patriarch now." I stood my ground, spreading my arms to block the corridor. "I am protecting his legacy," I said loudly enough for the microphones in the walls to catch every syllable. "You are not touching his things." Robert did not hesitate. He did not treat me like a daughter, he treated me like an obstacle. He lunged forward, shoving me hard with both hands. I was not expecting the violence. I stumbled back, my heels catching on the rug, and I fell hard, hitting my hip against the wainscoting. Keisha turned her camera away, not wanting to ruin her aesthetic, but she did not stop recording. My mother did not even blink. She just stepped over my legs, her red dress swishing around her ankles as she marched toward the study. "Get up and stop being dramatic," Robert growled, dusting off his hands as if touching me had soiled them. "You are lucky we let you stay here this long. Now find us some boxes." I lay on the floor for a moment, letting the pain radiate through me. I looked up at the ceiling toward the hidden camera lens disguised as a smoke detector. I knew Grandpa was watching. I knew he had just seen his son assault his granddaughter for a chance at a safe deposit box. The test was over, they had failed, and now the trap was ready to snap shut. The front door remained open, allowing a bitter draft to sweep through the foyer, but the chill that followed had nothing to do with the winter air. Heavy footsteps crunched on the marble entryway, echoing the violence that had just occurred. I pushed myself up to a sitting position, wincing as my bruised hip protested against the movement. In walked Bradley, Keisha's husband. If my family was a circus of chaotic greed, Bradley was the ringmaster of calculated cruelty. He wore a beige trench coat and a suit that cost more than my car, carrying a distressed leather briefcase like a weapon of war. He did not look like a grieving in-law. He looked like a conqueror arriving to survey his new colony. He stopped at the edge of the foyer, where the marble met the antique Persian rug Grandpa Elijah had brought back from Isfahan in the 50s. It was a masterpiece of silk and wool worth $10,000 easily, and it was the one object in the house Grandpa had strictly forbidden anyone to walk on with shoes. Bradley looked down at his muddy Oxfords, then at the rug. He did not hesitate. He stepped deliberately onto the delicate fibers, grinding a trail of wet earth into the intricate patterns with every stride. It was a silent act of dominance, a declaration that he owned everything under his feet. He walked past me as if I were a piece of discarded furniture, not even pausing to see if I was injured. "Bradley," I said, my voice raspy from the shock. "Your father just assaulted me." He paused, adjusting his cufflinks with slow, deliberate movements. He finally deigned to look down at me, his expression devoid of empathy. "Robert is under a lot of stress, Jasmine," he said, his voice smooth and patronizing. "Grief makes people do erratic things. We should cut him some slack." He stepped over my legs, careful not to let his trousers touch my dress, and placed his briefcase on the antique hallway table. The snap of the latches echoed like gunshots in the high-ceilinged room. He pulled out a crisp document, the legal header visible even from where I sat. He held it out, not to help me up, but to serve me. "What is this?" I asked, refusing to take it. He dropped it onto my lap. "It is a notice of temporary eviction," Bradley explained, smiling with his mouth, but not his eyes. "Since the owner of the property is deceased and the will is currently unverified, we need to secure the premises. That means removing non-essential personnel to prevent theft or damage." I stared at him in disbelief. "Non-essential personnel. I live here, Bradley. This is my home. Grandpa Elijah is not even buried yet, and you are kicking me out." Bradley chuckled a dry, humorless sound. He crouched down, balancing on the balls of his feet so he was eye level with me, invading my space with the smell of expensive cologne and arrogance. "Look, Jasmine," he said, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, as if explaining a difficult concept to a child. "I know you are emotional right now. I know you are hurting. But in the world of finance, we do not call this stealing. We economics people call this asset restructuring. You would not understand the complexities of estate liquidity, so it is best if you just let the adults handle the business." He patted my shoulder, a gesture so condescending it made my skin crawl. "Why do you not go pack a bag?" "You have an hour before I change the security codes." He stood up and straightened his coat, turning his back on me to admire the architecture he thought he had just conquered. I looked toward the hidden camera lens disguised in the crown molding. Inside the walls, Grandpa Elijah was watching a stranger muddy his rug and evict his granddaughter. Bradley thought he was restructuring assets. He had no idea he was restructuring his own destruction. I pulled myself up, using the antique table for support, my legs shaking not from weakness, but from the sheer effort of holding back my fury. Bradley had retreated to the living room to appraise the paintings, leaving me alone in the hallway with the woman who had birthed me. My mother emerged from the study empty-handed and visibly irritated, having likely found the desk drawers locked. This was my chance to twist the knife to expose the absolute depths of her maternal apathy for the silent audience in the panic room. I adjusted my expression into a mask of pathetic desperation and stumbled toward her, clutching the eviction notice to my chest like a shield. "Mother, please," I begged, allowing my voice to crack and waver. "You cannot let them throw me out. Not today. I have nowhere to go. I have less than $50 in my bank account. Grandpa's stipend barely covered the estate upkeep and the groceries. If you kick me out now, I will be on the street. I just need a week. Just 1 week to figure things out." She stopped and looked at me. There was no pity in her eyes, only a cold calculation as she scanned my tear-stained face. She did not see a daughter in distress. She saw a leech trying to attach itself to her newfound fortune. She let out a sharp sigh of annoyance and reached out, not to comfort me, but to beckon Keisha over. My sister trotted up obediently, the ring light still casting an eerie halo in her eyes. My mother pointed a manicured finger at the handbag resting in the crook of Keisha's arm. It was a matte crocodile skin Hermes, a bag that cost more than most people earned in a year. "Do you see this, Jasmine?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a Birkin. It cost me $20,000. That was every last cent of liquid cash I had this month. I spent it so your sister could look presentable for the gala next weekend because, unlike you, she actually has a future worth investing in. I put my money where the return is greatest, and you have never offered a return on investment." She stepped closer, her perfume suffocating me. "You are 28 years old. You are not a child. You are a liability. If you are broke, that is a failure of your own making. I am done carrying dead weight. If you cannot swim, then you drown. It is as simple as that." "But where will I sleep?" I whispered, forcing the question out, knowing the answer would be the final nail in her coffin. She laughed, a cruel sound that bounced off the high ceilings. "That is not my concern," she said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror and smoothing her red dress. "Go find a shelter. Go find a boyfriend. Or better yet, go find a bridge to sleep under. It might finally teach you some resilience. She turned her back on me, dismissing my existence entirely. Upstairs in the darkness of the panic room, I knew Grandpa Elijah had heard enough. They had crossed every line. Now it was time to bring the walls down. The occupation of the estate happened with the speed and entitlement of a military coup. Within 20 minutes, my mother had claimed the master suite, throwing Grandpa Elijah's clothes into the hallway to make room for her luggage. Keisha had annexed the guest wing, complaining loudly about the thread count of the Egyptian cotton sheets while setting up a tripod to film a weeping tour of her new quarters. My father had locked himself in the study, presumably trying to drill into the desk drawers. I stood at the foot of the grand staircase, holding the single bag I had packed, intending to retreat to my small room on the second floor. Bradley blocked my path. He stood on the third step, looking down at me like a bouncer at an exclusive club. "I am afraid there has been a reallocation of resources, Jasmine," he said, tapping his watch. "The bedrooms are currently at maximum capacity. We need the space for the legal team and appraisers arriving tomorrow. Plus, Keisha needs a glam room for her grief content. You understand priorities." I gripped the handle of my bag until my knuckles turned white. "So I really am sleeping on the street?" Then I asked, my voice flat. Bradley sighed as if my very presence was an administrative burden he had to file. "No need to be dramatic. We are not monsters. We have designated a temporary holding area for you until you vacate the premises." He pointed a manicured finger toward the narrow door under the stairs. The basement. The basement was not a finished living space. It was a cavernous, stone-walled labyrinth that had served as a wine cellar in the 1920s before falling into disrepair. It was damp-smelling of wet earth and ancient mildew. There was no heating, no windows, and the only light came from a single flickering bulb that swung on a wire. It was a dungeon in everything but name. To them, sending me down there was the ultimate humiliation, a way to put the servant girl back in her place beneath their feet. I looked at the dark door, then back at Bradley. "You want me to sleep in the old wine cellar?" "It is freezing down there. Consider it an incentive to leave sooner," he replied, smirking. "Think of it as a liquidation strategy. Now run along. We have a family dinner to plan, and you are not on the guest list." I lowered my head, feigning total defeat. "Fine," I whispered. "I will go." I walked to the narrow door, opened it, and descended into the gloom. But as soon as the door clicked shut above me, my posture straightened. Bradley thought he was burying me. In reality, he had just placed me in the cockpit of their destruction. I did not mind the cold. I did not mind the smell. I moved quickly through the shadows to the far corner of the room, where a series of old copper pipes ran along the ceiling. They did not know the architecture of this house like I did. This basement was the heart of the estate's old ventilation system. Specifically, the large metal vent directly above the old wine rack was the main echo chamber for the entire first floor. It acted like a primitive amplifier, funneling sound directly from the study and the dining room down to this exact spot. I dragged an old crate over and climbed up, pressing my ear against the cold metal. The acoustics were perfect. I could hear the scrape of a chair, the clinking of glasses, and my father's heavy footsteps pacing above. Even better, I knew something else they had missed. The wall safe in the study was not actually in the wall. It was a floor safe installed beneath the rug, and its locking mechanism was accessible from below if you knew which stone to remove in the basement ceiling. I reached up and ran my hand along the masonry, finding the loose brick I had loosened years ago for maintenance. I was not just listening to them, I was directly beneath their prize. I sat down on the crate in the dark and waited for the show to begin. They had put me in hell, but I held the pitchfork. The silence of the estate at night was deceptive. While my family slept in stolen beds, dreaming of unearned riches, I sat on a crate in the freezing darkness, waiting for the truth to leak through the floorboards. It did not take long. Around 2 a.m, the heavy thud of footsteps echoed directly above my head. It was the study. Someone was pacing the exact rhythm of a predator stalking prey. I pressed my ear against the cold copper of the main vent, holding my breath until my lungs burned. The voice that drifted down was unmistakable. It was Bradley. He was not whispering, he was projecting his arrogance into the phone, assuming his privacy was absolute. "Listen to me, Tony," he hissed, the sound amplified by the metal ductwork. "I do not care about the historical preservation status. I want the demolition crews on standby for Tuesday morning. The ink will be dry before the body is in the ground." I froze. Demolition crews? He was not just selling the estate, he was erasing it. Bradley laughed, a sound that vibrated through the pipes. "Robert and Linda have no clue. I told them the foundation is rotting. I told them the market has crashed, and the best offer we can get is 1.2 million. They are desperate. They will sign anything I put in front of them just to pay off their credit cards." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Then Bradley replied, his voice dripping with greed. "No, the real offer is 4.5 million. The developers want the land for a strip mall. I pocket the difference. That is a $3.3 million commission for handling the headache. They get crumbs, I get the cake. It is just business." My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. He was swindling his own in-laws. He was going to sell my grandfather's legacy, the home where I learned to walk the gardens where my grandmother planted her roses, to be bulldozed for a parking lot and a fast food court. And he was stealing over $3 million from my parents in the process. It was a betrayal so layered, it was almost impressive in its depravity. Deep inside the walls in the hidden panic room, the scene played out in high definition. Grandpa Elijah sat in the command chair, bathed in the blue glow of the monitors. He watched the man sitting at his desk, drinking his scotch and plotting the destruction of his life's work. He heard every word of the treason. His hands, which had been trembling with age earlier that morning, now gripped the leather armrests of his chair with a terrifying strength. His knuckles turned white. The veins in his forearms bulged. He was not just angry, he was galvanized. He looked at the screen, his eyes narrowing into slits. He realized then that he had not just raised a greedy son, he had welcomed a viper into the nest. And vipers did not deserve mercy, they deserved to be crushed. He reached for the intercom button that connected to my earpiece, but stopped. He wanted to see how far they would go. He released the chair arms slowly. His breathing controlled his resolve, turning into cold, hard steel. "Let them sign," he whispered to the empty room. "Let them dig their own graves." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2 a.m., but the house was not asleep. A sliver of light bled from under the study door, cutting across the dark hardwood floor like a scar. Jasmine froze, her breath hitching in her throat. She had come downstairs for a glass of water, but the low, animated murmur of Bradley's voice stopped her in her tracks. He wasn't talking to her sister. The tone was different, calculating, sharp, the voice of a predator closing in on a kill. She pressed her back against the cool wainscoting, straining to hear. "Don't worry about the zoning permits, Mike. I told you the old man is practically vegetative." Bradley's voice drifted through the wood, dripping with arrogance. "He signed the power of attorney yesterday. He thinks we're selling it to a nice young couple who wants to restore the Victorian charm." Jasmine heard the clink of glass against a bottle. He was celebrating. "Listen closely, because I am only going to say this once." Bradley continued, his volume dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried terrifyingly well in the silence. "I got the appraisal fixed. On paper, this rotting pile of lumber is worth 1.2 million. That is what I told the family. That is what creates the panic to sell." Jasmine's hands balled into fists. 1.2 million was low, but given the market it had seemed plausible to her parents. But Bradley wasn't finished. "But you and I both know the commercial rezoning goes through next month. The developer from Chicago isn't buying a home, Mike. He is buying the land for the new luxury retail complex. The real offer letter is sitting right here in front of me. $4.5 million. Cash." The air left Jasmine's lungs. 4.5 million. He wasn't just skimming off the top, he was orchestrating a multi-million-dollar heist against his own wife's family. He was going to bulldoze the home her grandfather built with his own hands to make room for a parking lot and a department store. My commission on the side remains 40% as discussed. Bradley laughed a cold, dry sound. The in-laws get their peanuts, they pay off their little debts, and they thank me for saving them. Meanwhile, we walk away with the lion's share. Just have the papers ready for the morning. I want this done before anyone wakes up and smells the coffee. Jasmine wanted to burst into the room and scream to tear the phone from his hand, but she knew better. An emotional outburst would be her word against his, and right now Bradley held all the cards. She needed to be smarter. She needed to be lethal. She quietly pulled out her phone, started a voice recording, and held it close to the crack in the door, capturing the tail end of his gloating. Unknown to Bradley and even to Jasmine in the hallway, they were not the only ones awake. Behind the built-in bookcase in the library, adjacent to the study, a mechanism had been silently triggered hours ago. In the hidden room that had served as his sanctuary for decades, Grandpa sat in his wheelchair in the darkness. He wasn't the senile, helpless old man Bradley mocked at dinner. Through the thin ventilation grate hidden behind a decorative painting, every word of Bradley's treasonous conversation came through with crystal clarity. 1.2 million. The number echoed in his mind. He looked at the framed blueprints on his desk, the original designs of this house drawn in 1955. He looked at the hidden safe in the corner, the one Bradley had been desperately trying to find for months. The old man's eyes, usually clouded with feigned confusion to protect his secrets, were now sharp and clear, burning with a cold, terrifying rage. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the leather armrests of his wheelchair. His breathing remained steady, controlled by sheer will. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to shout. He simply reached out a trembling hand and pressed a small red button on the console of his security system, ensuring the audio from the study was permanently archived on his private server. Bradley thought he was the hunter playing a game with sheep. He had no idea he had just walked into the lion's den and locked the door behind him. The sun had barely breached the horizon, casting long, pale shadows across the solarium floor. But the house was already humming with the energy of betrayal. Jasmine had not slept. She stood in the alcove behind the heavy velvet drapes of the morning room, watching her father Tyrone pace back and forth on the patio. He looked nothing like the grieving patriarch he pretended to be in front of the neighbors. He looked like a cornered animal seeing an open gate. He checked his watch, wiped sweat from his forehead despite the morning chill, and dialed a number. Jasmine cracked the window open just an inch. The crisp morning air carried his voice directly to her. "Rocco, listen to me, put the dogs away," Tyrone hissed into the phone, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and manic excitement. "I told you it is happening today. The ink will be dry by noon. You don't need to send anyone to the house. You want your money? You stay away until I have the check." Jasmine pressed record on her phone again. This was a different kind of poison than Bradley's cold calculation. This was desperate, sweaty greed. "Yeah, I know I owe 50. I'm telling you I'm going to have double that for you," Tyrone continued, his voice dropping lower, glancing toward the upstairs bedroom window where Jasmine's mother Serena was likely still sleeping. "I'm paying you 100 grand cash to clear the slate and the interest. Just call off the guys." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end, and then a greasy, self-satisfied smile spread across his face. It was a look Jasmine had never seen before, a look that stripped away every illusion she had about her father's character. "And listen," Tyrone laughed, a short barking sound. "Tell Sheila to get her passport ready. We are booking the first flight to Rio once the funds clear. No, Serena doesn't get a dime. Are you kidding me? She thinks this money is going into a secure trust for her retirement. The old woman is clueless. I'm taking my half of the sale paying you and I'm gone. She can live off Social Security or move in with one of the kids for all I care. I've spent 40 years in this house. I deserve a payout." Jasmine felt the blood drain from her face. Her father wasn't just a victim of Bradley's lowball scheme. He was a co-conspirator in the destruction of his own family. He was willing to leave his wife destitute, homeless, and alone just to cover his gambling debts and run off with a mistress. He was selling his father's legacy not out of necessity, but out of pure, unadulterated selfishness. He genuinely believed the house was selling for $1.2 million, and he was salivating over his share of that fraction, completely unaware that Bradley was playing him for a fool too. It was a nest of vipers, each one biting the other. "I'll text you when the wire hits," Tyrone said, hanging up the phone. He smoothed back his thinning hair, took a deep breath, and practiced a somber, sad expression before turning to head back inside. Jasmine saved the recording. Her hand was shaking not from fear, but from a cold, hard fury. She had the evidence. She had Bradley on tape admitting to the $4.5 million real value and the commercial zoning fraud. Now she had her father on tape admitting to gambling debts and his plan to abandon her mother penniless. She slipped away from the window and moved silently toward the kitchen. The pieces were all there. The stage was set. Breakfast was about to be served, and Jasmine decided it was time to ruin everyone's appetite. She wasn't just going to stop the sale, she was going to burn their entire house of cards to the ground. The dining room air was thick enough to choke on. Bradley strode in, chest puffed out like a peacock, followed closely by a man in an ill-fitting gray suit who looked like he had slept in his car. He carried a scuffed briefcase and smelled faintly of peppermint, trying to mask the scent of stale bourbon. Bradley clapped a hand on the man's shoulder, introducing him as Mr. Sterling, the family's new legal counsel brought in to expedite the transition of the estate, given Grandpa's declining mental faculties. Tyrone sat at the head of the table, nodding vigorously, his eyes darting nervously toward the kitchen, where he knew Jasmine had been. He needed this to work. He needed the money. Serena sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, looking small and defeated. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, opening a leather folder with trembling hands. He began to read from a document that looked freshly printed, the ink barely dry. He droned on about medical incapacitation and immediate liquidation of assets for the benefit of the primary care providers. He claimed that a codicil had been signed 3 days prior, granting Bradley full executive power to sell the property immediately to cover mounting medical costs. Jasmine watched the performance from the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't sit. She didn't blink. She just watched the bead of sweat trickle down Mr. Sterling's temple. When he finished reading, a heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by Tyrone's heavy breathing. "May I see that document?" Jasmine asked, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. It wasn't a request. She walked over and plucked the paper from Sterling's damp fingers before he could protest. She scanned the page, her eyes narrowing. Her background in forensic accounting and financial fraud detection kicked into high gear. She didn't need to be a lawyer to spot an amateur forgery, but this was insulting. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Jasmine read aloud, her tone dry and clinical. "You cite Probate Code Section 894 regarding the immediate transfer of deed upon medical diagnosis. That represents a fascinating legal precedent, Mr. Sterling. Mostly because in this state, Code 894 refers to agricultural livestock regulations, not real estate inheritance. Did you intend to sell Grandpa as cattle? Or did you just copy-paste this from a template you found on a forum for first-year law students?" Sterling's face went from pale to a blotchy red. He stammered, pulling at his collar. "There was a clerical error," he muttered, looking to Bradley for help. Jasmine ignored him and flipped the page. "And here in the notarization block, you have the date listed as the 14th. Grandpa was at the hospital getting an MRI on the 14th. We have the admission records. Unless the notary met him inside the MRI machine, this signature is physically impossible. Furthermore, the word executor is spelled with an ER at the end. 3 times. She dropped the document onto the table. It landed with a slap that made Serena jump. "You aren't a lawyer, are you? You look familiar. I think I saw you at the dive bar down on 4th Street last Christmas. You were the guy trying to sell bootleg watches out of your trunk." Tyrone looked at Bradley, panic rising in his eyes. The charade was crumbling. Bradley's jaw clenched, the veins in his neck bulging. He slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the fine china. "Enough of this," Bradley roared, stepping between Jasmine and his sweating accomplice. He pointed a finger in her face. "Who do you think you are? You are a guest in this house. You don't have a law degree. You don't know what you are talking about. Mr. Sterling is a respected associate, and these are technicalities. The intent of the document is clear. We are selling this house to save this family, and I will not let a jealous, petty little girl derail a multi-million-dollar transaction because of a typo." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "If you try to interfere with this sale, Jasmine, I will ruin you. I will make sure you are cut out of everything. You will leave this house with nothing but the clothes on your back. Do you understand me? Sit down and shut up or get out." Jasmine didn't flinch. She looked at Bradley, then at her father, who was refusing to meet her gaze. She picked up the fraudulent will and folded it neatly, sliding it into her pocket. "I will keep this for safekeeping," she said calmly. "Just for the records." Bradley lunged for her but stopped short as the front door chimes echoed through the house. The real players were arriving. The game was about to change. The heavy steel door of the Titan safe loomed in the corner of the library like a monolith of judgment. It was a relic from a different era, cold, impenetrable, and mocking. The interruption at the front door had been momentarily forgotten in the face of immediate greed. Bradley stood before the dial, sweat glistening on his upper lip despite the air conditioning. He cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the tense silence of the room. The fake lawyer Sterling hovered nervously by the drinks cabinet, nursing a scotch he hadn't been offered, while Tyrone paced the Persian rug, wearing a track in the wool. Bradley spun the dial with the arrogant confidence of a man who believed the world revolved around him. Right to 19, left to 85, his own birth year. He yanked the heavy brass handle. It remained immovable, solid as the foundation of the house itself. He cursed under his breath, wiping his palms on his trousers. "Move over," Keisha snapped, shoving her husband aside with a hip check. Her acrylic nails clicked against the cold metal as she took command. "He adored me. I was the first grandchild. It is obviously my birthday." She spun the numbers with precision. July 04, 91. She grabbed the handle with both hands and pulled, groaning with exertion. The safe did not budge. It didn't even click. Tyrone stepped in his desperation, making his movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Try the wedding anniversary," he hissed at Serena. "Your anniversary." He was so proud that day. Serena, looking pale and ghostly, whispered the dates. Tyrone spun the dial. Left, right, left. He pulled. Nothing. Locked tight. Panic began to set in. The air in the room grew hot and stifling. They tried everything. They tried the date Bradley joined the firm. They tried the birth dates of the great-grandchildren. They tried the address of the house. They spent 45 minutes inputting the coordinates of their own lives, expecting the universe to unlock its treasures for them simply because they existed. They punched in every number that held significance to their own egos, their own milestones, their own selfish timelines. Bradley kicked the base of the safe, a dull thud that did more damage to his shoe than the iron. "What is wrong with this thing?" he shouted, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "It must be rusted shut. Or maybe the old man changed it to something nonsensical just to spite us." Tyrone rubbed his temples, his eyes darting around the room as if the combination might be written on the wallpaper. "Think," he muttered. "What other dates are there? What are we missing?" Jasmine stood in the shadow of the doorway, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed. She had watched the entire circus with a detached, cold amusement. It was a masterclass in narcissism. They were like thieves trying to break into a sanctuary using the wrong language. "Has anyone tried Grandpa's birthday?" Jasmine asked. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a guillotine blade. The frantic energy instantly evaporated, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Bradley froze with his hand halfway to the dial. Tyrone stopped pacing mid-step. They looked at each other, then at Serena, then back at the safe. The silence stretched, becoming agonizing. Not a single one of them moved toward the dial. They didn't move because they couldn't. They knew the estimated value of his house down to the cent. They knew the balance of his checking account. They knew the make and model of his vintage car. But the day the man who built this empire was born, it was a complete mystery to them. They stood there paralyzed by their own ignorance, while Jasmine smiled from the shadows, the only one in the room who actually knew the man, not just the money. The silence following the failure at the safe was eventually broken by the growl of Bradley's stomach and his demand for dinner. Serena, eager to regain some semblance of control and distract from the awkward tension, turned her gaze on Jasmine. It was not a look of a mother asking for help. It was the imperious glare of a mistress addressing the help. "Since you are just standing there contributing nothing," Serena said, her voice brittle and sharp, "go to the kitchen. We need a full service. Roast chicken, glazed carrots, the works. And don't burn it like you usually do. We have guests." She gestured vaguely at the sweaty fake lawyer who was still hovering by the liquor cabinet. Jasmine did not argue. She did not roll her eyes. She simply turned on her heel and walked into the kitchen. For the next hour, the sounds of chopping and sizzling filled the air, a stark contrast to the hushed conspiratorial whispers drifting in from the living room. She cooked with mechanical precision, channeling her fury into the blade of the chef's knife. She prepared the meal perfectly, plating it on the family's best china, the set her grandmother had loved. When she brought the heavy trays out, no one offered to help. They sat at the mahogany table, forks already in hand like hungry vultures. Tyrone was pouring wine with a shaking hand. Keisha was scrolling on her phone, ignoring everyone. Jasmine moved around the table, serving them one by one. She placed a steaming plate of chicken in front of Bradley. He did not say thank you. He did not even look up. He took a bite, chewed slowly, and then scowled. With a deliberate, casual flick of his wrist, he shoved the plate off the edge of the table. The crash was deafening. Porcelain shattered against the hardwood floor, sending chicken gravy and vegetables splattering across Jasmine's shoes and the hem of her jeans. The room went dead silent. Even Sterling looked uncomfortable. "Oops," Bradley said, his voice dripping with mock innocence. He leaned back in his chair, picking his teeth with a fingernail. Slipped. The gravy was too greasy. "You call this cooking? It is swill." Jasmine stood still, looking down at the mess at her feet. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks, but she refused to let tears fall. "Well," Bradley barked, pointing at the floor. "What are you waiting for? A written invitation. Get on your knees and clean it up," Bradley Tyrone muttered weakly. "Maybe that is a bit much." "Shut up," Tyrone Bradley snapped, not taking his eyes off Jasmine. He leaned forward, his face twisting into a cruel sneer. "She needs to learn her place. Look at her, standing there like she owns the joint." He kicked a piece of chicken toward her. "Better get used to it, Jasmine," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "Start learning the trade now, because once we sell this place and the old man is gone, you won't have him to hide behind anymore. Without him backing you, this is all you are good for. Scrubbing floors and cleaning up after your betters. You are nothing without his pity." Serena sipped her wine, looking away, refusing to make eye contact with her daughter. She chose her comfort over her child's dignity. Jasmine slowly crouched down. She picked up a shard of the broken plate. It was sharp, jagged. She looked up at Bradley, her eyes dark and unreadable. She was not cleaning up a mess. She was gathering ammunition. Every insult, every degradation was being recorded in the ledger of her mind, and the debt collection was coming soon. "You are right, Bradley," Jasmine said softly, her voice devoid of fear. "I am learning a lot tonight. I am learning exactly what each of you is worth." Inside the walls, the recording tape spun on. Grandpa had heard enough. The lion was awake, and he was ready to hunt. The dinner plates were pushed aside, the broken china swept into a pile in the corner, like a forgotten secret. Bradley reached into his briefcase and produced a single crisp sheet of paper. He slid it across the mahogany table toward Jasmine. It stopped right in front of her, the header staring up in bold black letters, "Quitclaim Deed." Beside the document, he placed a thick envelope. It hit the wood with a dull thud. I am a businessman. Jasmine, not a monster. Bradley said, his voice smooth, shedding the aggression from moments before like a snakeskin. I know you have nothing. No job, no savings, no future. So I am offering you a lifeline. Inside that envelope is $5,000. Cash. Untraceable. Jasmine stared at the envelope. $5,000. It was an insult. It was less than the cost of the suit Bradley was wearing. It was the price he had put on her heritage, her home, and her grandfather's legacy. Sign the deed. Bradley continued, leaning back, interlacing his fingers behind his head. Renounce all claim to this property, past, present, and future. Take the cash and leave. Go start over somewhere else, somewhere far away. Or don't. And watch us evict you legally within the week with $0 in your pocket. It is your choice. Tyrone looked away, unable to watch his daughter being bought out for pennies. Serena busied herself with a napkin, her silence a seal of approval. Jasmine's shoulders began to shake. She let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands. She summoned every ounce of pain she had felt over the last 24 years, every moment of neglect, every second of isolation, and she poured it into the performance of a lifetime. 5,000, she wept, her voice trembling, broken. Grandpa built this house. It is worth millions. How can you do this? It is business, Bradley said, cold and final. Sign it or get out. He pulled out his smartphone and held it up the camera lens, a black eye fixed on her face. I want this on video. Proof that you accepted the buyout willingly. No takebacks. Jasmine wiped her eyes. Her hands shaking violently. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a pen. It was a simple black fountain pen. Can I at least use my own pen? She stammered, sniffing loudly. Grandpa gave it to me. It feels right. Bradley rolled his eyes but nodded at the camera. Whatever, just sign the line. Jasmine uncapped the pen. The ink inside was a special compound she had synthesized herself in her chemistry lab back in college, designed to oxidize and vanish completely upon contact with air within 60 minutes. To the naked eye, it looked like deep, permanent blue. She bent over the paper. The camera zoomed in. Her hand shook so hard the tip of the pen danced on the line before she pressed down. She wrote her signature loop by loop, ensuring it was legible, bold, and clear for Bradley's video. She signed her life away. She dropped the pen and pushed the paper back. Bradley snatched it up, grinning like a hyena. He panned the camera to the signature, then to the cash, then back to Jasmine's tear-stained face. Done and done, Bradley crowed, ending the recording. He tossed the envelope at her. Smart girl. Now get out of my sight. We have a sale to finalize. Jasmine clutched the envelope to her chest, looking small and defeated. But as she turned away, shielding her face from them, the tears stopped instantly. Her eyes were dry, clear, and cold. In 1 hour, that paper would be blank. Bradley had a video of her signing a document that legally would cease to exist before the sun came up. He had just bought a ghost. The ink on the fraudulent deed had barely begun its chemical process of disappearing when the low hum of a luxury engine vibrated against the front windows. A black sedan tinted so dark it looked like a void in the night idled in the driveway. Bradley checked his watch, a smirk playing on his lips as he smoothed his tie. He opened the front door before the bell could ring, ushering a man inside with a hasty, conspiratorial wave. The visitor was a shark in a three-piece suit, a man whose smile didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. He carried a sleek aluminum briefcase. He didn't offer a hand to shake. He simply placed the case on the hallway console table, right next to a vase of fresh lilies Jasmine had arranged that morning. Hidden deep within the foliage of those flowers, a micro-lens camera no larger than a pinhead was recording in 4K resolution. Here is the sweetener, the man said, his voice smooth and oily. 200,000 in small, non-sequential bills. As agreed. This is for ensuring the appraisal stays low and the competing bids from the Historical Society get lost in the mail. Bradley's hands trembled slightly as he popped the latches. The lid hissed open, revealing neat stacks of currency. The smell of old money and corruption filled the foyer. He ran a finger over the bills, his eyes gleaming with avarice. "Consider it done," Bradley whispered, closing the case with a snap. "The family is on board. The deeds are signed. The old man is basically a vegetable. I am the trustee de facto. The property is yours to bulldoze by Monday morning. I will hand over the keys personally once the wire transfer for the main sale hits the offshore account." The man nodded, turning to leave. It is a pleasure doing business with a man who knows the true value of pragmatism. The developer wants to break ground on the parking structure before the month is out. Don't let your conscience grow a spine at the 11th hour. "Conscience doesn't pay for a summer home in the Hamptons," Bradley quipped, locking the front door as the sedan pulled away. He picked up the heavy case, testing its weight, already spending the money in his head. Upstairs, Jasmine watched the live feed on her tablet, her face illuminated by the cold blue light of the screen. She didn't feel anger anymore. She felt the cold satisfaction of a prosecutor closing a case. Bradley had just crossed the line from unethical to criminal. By accepting cash to artificially lower the property value and suppress competitive bids, he had committed embezzlement of trust assets and commercial fraud. He hadn't just cheated his family, he had cheated the estate he was legally sworn to protect. She tapped the screen, saving the video file to 3 separate cloud servers. The trap was not just set, it had already snapped shut. Bradley was walking around with a briefcase full of felonies, and he didn't even know the trial had already begun. The evidence was irrefutable, high definition, and backed up in triplicate. She powered down the tablet and listened to his heavy footsteps heading toward the master bedroom, the sound of a man walking to his own execution. The air inside the hidden sanctuary behind the library bookcase was thick with the ozone smell of overheating electronics and the palpable heat of an old man's rage. The bank of monitors on the wall flickered with the silent black and white feeds of the house, showing the empty hallway where the transaction had just occurred. But Grandpa wasn't looking at the screens anymore. He was looking at the door handle of the secret exit, his hands gripping the rubber tires of his wheelchair so tightly that the leather of his gloves creaked under the strain. His chest heaved, a rattling, wheezing sound that filled the small space. The biometric monitor strapped to his wrist beeped an urgent, rhythmic warning. High blood pressure, critical levels. The betrayal of a son-in-law was expected, a snake acting like a snake, but the voice of Tyrone, his own flesh and blood, conspiring to leave his mother destitute and sell his heritage for gambling chips, had severed the last thread of his restraint. "I am going out there," Grandpa growled, his voice a low rumble of thunder. "I am going to wheel myself into that living room, and I am going to break my son's jaw. I don't care if it kills me. I want to see the look in his eyes when he realizes I know." He lurched the chair forward, the motor whining as he engaged the drive. Jasmine slipped through the hidden panel just in time, closing it silently behind her. She saw the red numbers on his wrist monitor and the purple vein throbbing in his temple. She didn't panic. She moved with the fluid grace of a soldier in the field, kneeling beside the chair and placing a firm hand on his trembling arm. "Stop," she commanded, her voice soft but unyielding. "Not now, not like this." He looked at her, his eyes wild, brimming with tears of fury. "They are selling us out, Jasmine, for scraps. Tyrone, my own boy. He is letting that vulture pick my bones before I am even cold." "If you go out there now, you lose," Jasmine said, looking him dead in the eye. "You lose everything. Bradley will claim you are having a dementia episode. He has the fake doctor on speed dial. He has the power of attorney, paperwork forged or not, and the police will side with the sane adults. They will sedate you, institutionalize you, and the sale will go through while you are drooling in a chemically induced coma. Is that what you want?" The old man slumped back, the fight draining out of him as the logic pierced his anger. He hit the armrest, a weak, frustrated blow. Then, when he rasped, "When do we strike tomorrow night?" Jasmine whispered, a cold, predatory smile touching her lips. "The signing dinner. The buyers are coming to finalize the deal with the notary. The whole family will be there. Bradley wants an audience for his victory. We are going to give him one. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small vial of medication, handing him a pill and a glass of water. You need to lower your heart rate. You need to sleep. Because tomorrow you aren't just an observer. You are the main event. I have the recordings. I have the disappearing deed. I have the video of the bribe. The trap is primed, but I need you sharp. I need you to be the lion they forgot they lived with. Grandpa took the pill, his hand steadying. He looked at the screens one last time at the empty house filled with enemies. Make sure Tyrone sits on my left tomorrow, he said, his voice regaining its steel. I want him within reach when the world falls apart. Jasmine nodded, standing up and smoothing her shirt. Consider it done. Rest now, Grandpa. The war starts at sunset. Twilight descended, but the house did not darken in mourning. It erupted in a vulgar display of neon and excess. What was billed as a solemn signing dinner to finalize the transition of the estate had mutated into a grotesque launch party. A DJ booth had been erected in the corner of the grand foyer, blasting upbeat loungehouse music that vibrated the crystal chandelier. Waiters in white tuxedos weaved through the crowd, carrying silver trays laden with truffle arancini and glasses of vintage Dom Perignon. Jasmine stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the sea of strangers filling her grandfather's home. There were no family friends, no neighbors, no one who had actually known the man who built this house. The room was packed with Bradley's associates, slick real estate sharks, zoning commissioners, and the silent partners from the investment firm. They weren't here to pay respects. They were here to network over the carcass of a legacy. Bradley stood in the center of the room holding a champagne flute, his face flushed with the intoxication of imminent wealth. He laughed loudly at a joke made by a man wearing a watch that cost more than Jasmine's college tuition. Beside him, Serena was playing the role of the grieving yet gracious hostess, accepting condolences from people who were mentally measuring the square footage of the living room for demolition. Jasmine descended the stairs, her movement unnoticed by the revelers. She scanned the room for a photograph, a candle, a single memento of her grandfather. There was nothing. The mantelpiece, usually adorned with family portraits, had been cleared. In the center of the room, on a large brass easel where a memorial portrait should have stood, rested a large, glossy architectural rendering. She walked closer, the knot in her stomach tightening. It was a blueprint. The beautiful Victorian gardens were replaced by a concrete parking structure. The house itself was gone, replaced by a glass and steel monstrosity labeled in bold gold font the Tyrone Plaza. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. Bradley had stroked her father's ego to the point of blindness. Tyrone stood by the easel, swaying slightly, a glass of scotch in his hand, pointing at the rendering with a swollen pride. He didn't see the destruction of his father's life work. He only saw his own name in lights, a vanity project built on the ashes of his betrayal. Look at the retail space, Tyrone slurred to a disinterested blonde woman in a cocktail dress. High-end boutiques, maybe a cigar lounge on the roof. It is going to put the family name on the map. Jasmine felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Bradley, his smile tight and predatory. Try the caviar, Jasmine, he whispered, leaning in close so only she could hear over the thumping bass. It is imported. Consider it a severance package. And smile. You are ruining the aesthetic. I am just admiring the artwork, Jasmine replied, her voice steady, gesturing to the blueprint. It is very detailed. Did you design the demolition charges yourself, or did you outsource that too? Bradley's eyes narrowed. Don't get cute. The notary is setting up in the dining room. Within the hour, this is all over. Go check on the old man. Make sure he is sedated. I don't want any drooling or moaning interrupting the toast. I will make sure he is ready. Jasmine said, her expression unreadable. She turned and walked away, not toward the kitchen, but toward the library. The party was in full swing. The predators were feasting, and they had absolutely no idea that the prey was about to bite back. She touched the phone in her pocket, ensuring the connection to the hidden room was live. The stage was set. It was time to bring out the guest of honor. The doorbell chimed incessantly, announcing the arrival of the second wave of guests, the extended family. These were not the wolves in Italian suits, but the sheep who followed them. Cousins, aunts, and distant uncles spilled into the grand foyer, shaking the night chill from their coats and marveling at the sheer scale of the celebration. They had been summoned not to mourn a great man's decline, but to validate the transaction to serve as the smiling audience for Bradley's benevolent coup. Jasmine emerged from the hallway leading to the library, a specter amidst the revelry. She wore no sequins, no silk, no colors of celebration. She was dressed in severe, unadorned black-fitted slacks, a high-necked sweater, and heavy boots. In a room swirling with vibrant cocktail attire and forced laughter, she looked like an open wound. She moved through the crowd not to mingle, but to hold her ground. As she passed a cluster of her mother's cousins near the buffet, the conversation died instantly. The air grew frigid. Heads turned away, but eyes watched her from the periphery, sharp with judgment. The silence was louder than the thumping bass of the DJ. "That is her," a whisper hissed, carrying easily over the clinking of silverware. "Serena told me she tried to declare him incompetent just to get control of the checking account. I heard she stole her mother's jewelry to pay for drugs," another voice muttered, dripping with scandalized delight. "Bradley said they had to pay off the police just to keep it quiet. It is a mercy they let her stay in the guest room." The lies had been planted deep and watered daily. Bradley and Serena had executed a character assassination so thorough that Jasmine barely recognized herself in their whispers. To them, she wasn't the granddaughter who had changed feeding tubes, managed medications, and slept on the floor by a sickbed for 3 years. She was the leech, the unstable daughter, who refused to let the family move on to their prosperous future. Jasmine approached her Aunt Clara, a woman who had once baked her birthday cakes and knitted her scarves. She offered a small tentative nod, a test of blood against money. Clara looked at Jasmine, her expression hardening into a mask of absolute disgust. She deliberately turned her back, pulling her teenage son closer to her side as if Jasmine were contagious. "Don't look at her," Clara snapped loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear. "It is disrespectful to your Uncle Bradley after everything he has done to save us from ruin." Jasmine stopped. She didn't flinch. She didn't try to defend herself against the absurdity of the accusations. She let the rejection wash over her, cold and familiar. She realized then that she was already a ghost in her own home. They had written her out of the family history before the ink was even dry on the sale. To them, she was just an obstacle to the payout, a sour note in their symphony of greed. She retreated to the far corner of the room, standing beneath the shadow of the grand staircase, her back pressed against the cool plaster. From this vantage point, she watched them eat the food she had cooked, drink the wine bought with credit against the house, and laugh over the blueprint of a parking lot that would erase their heritage. She stood alone, a singular point of darkness in a room too bright with false promise. Bradley caught her eye from across the room. He raised his champagne flute in a mocking toast, his smile widening as he savored her ostracization. He thought her isolation was his victory. He thought he had shamed her into submission. He didn't understand that by casting her out, they had freed her. She no longer owed them politeness. She no longer owed them loyalty. She checked her watch. 10 minutes until the notary opened his seal. 10 minutes until the ghost started screaming. The thumping bass of the house music faded into a respectful albeit artificial silence as Bradley tapped a spoon against his champagne flute. The sharp ring pierced the air, signaling the main event. He gestured grandly toward the makeshift stage, introducing the man of the hour, the grieving son, the architect of the future Tyrone. Tyrone stepped into the spotlight, his face flushed with scotch and the adrenaline of impending wealth. He adjusted his silk tie, pausing for dramatic effect, allowing the hush to settle over the room. He looked out at the sea of strangers, at the sharks and the sycophants, and he didn't see people. He saw dollar signs. He gripped the microphone with both hands, leaning in close, his voice dropping an octave to feign a solemnity he did not possess. My friend's Tyrone began, his voice trembling with a practiced vibrato. We gather here tonight, not just to sign papers, but to say goodbye. Goodbye to a house that holds so many memories. Goodbye to an era. My father built this place with his bare hands, brick by brick. And I remember as a little boy sitting on his knee right over there by the fireplace, listening to him tell me, "Son, one day all of this will be yours to protect." A murmur of sympathetic cooing rippled through the crowd. Jasmine, standing in the shadows, felt bile rise in her throat. She remembered the reality. She remembered Tyrone stealing cash from his father's wallet when he was 12. She remembered the screaming matches, the years of silence, the way Tyrone only visited when he needed a loan. The fireplace story was a fabrication, a fairy tale spun to justify the demolition. Tyrone paused, pulling a monogrammed handkerchief from his pocket. He dabbed at eyes that were perfectly dry. "It breaks my heart to let it go," he continued, sniffing loudly into the microphone. "It truly does. But my father, bless his soul, he is tired. His mind is gone. He doesn't know where he is anymore. And I know in my heart of hearts that he would want us to move forward. He would want the Tyrone legacy to evolve. He wouldn't want us trapped in the past, burdened by maintenance and taxes. He would want us to build something new, something grand. The Tyrone Plaza." He swept his arm toward the rendering of the parking lot and retail complex. The crowd applauded politely. Tyrone soaked it up, looking around the room. His gaze landed near the back, near the catering station, where a woman in a red dress stood leaning against a pillar. It was Sheila, his mistress. She raised a glass to him, a secret smile playing on her lips. Tyrone lowered the handkerchief, his face hidden from his wife and daughter for a split second. He caught Sheila's eye and winked. A quick, lecherous twitch of the eyelid that said, "We did it, baby. Rio is waiting." He composed himself instantly, turning back to the crowd, the mask of the dutiful son sliding back into place. "So tonight, we do the hard thing," Tyrone declared, his voice swelling with false nobility. "We sign the papers. We secure the future for the family just as he would have wanted. I do this for him. I do this for us." He gestured to the notary who was sitting at the head of the dining table, a stack of legal documents waiting like an execution order. "Let us get this done," Tyrone said, stepping off the stage to a round of applause. He walked toward the table, shaking hands, accepting pats on the back, a man walking on air, completely unaware that the floor was about to drop out from under him. Jasmine checked her phone. The signal from the library was green. It was time. The applause for Tyrone was still rippling through the room when Bradley snatched the microphone from his father-in-law's hand. He didn't wait for Tyrone to leave the stage. He simply eclipsed him, stepping in front with the swagger of a ringmaster commanding a circus. The lighting shifted, focusing entirely on Bradley, turning Tyrone into a shadow in his own story. "That was touching, truly," Bradley said, his voice booming with a performative sincerity that fooled no one but the drunkest guests. "But let us be real for a moment. Sentimentality doesn't pay the property taxes. Nostalgia doesn't fix a foundation that is crumbling into dust." He gestured violently toward the high ceilings, the crown molding the history surrounding them. "You see a home. I see a liability. I see dry rot. I see a money pit that has been dragging this family down for decades. We are doing the humane thing tonight. We are putting this old beast out of its misery." A few nervous titters ran through the crowd, but most nodded, swayed by his confidence and the champagne. "And to inaugurate the future, to officially break the seal on the Tyrone Plaza, I have prepared a little entertainment," Bradley announced, grinning like a shark. "We all know the stories of the old man's secret fortune, the hidden accounts, the gold bars. Well, since he is too far gone to remember the combination, and since we are all family here, I decided we shouldn't wait for the probate courts to count our blessings." He snapped his fingers. The heavy double doors to the library were thrown open by two waiters. All eyes turned. Standing next to the massive Titan safe was a man in industrial coveralls, looking out of place among the tuxedos. He held a diamond-tipped drill the size of a jackhammer. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet Mr. Clock, the city's finest safecracker," Bradley crowed, gesturing for the crowd to gather round. We couldn't guess the code because, let's face it, the old man probably set it to the date of his first hallucination. So we are doing this the hard way. Tonight, we open the vault. Whatever is inside pays for the demolition crew tomorrow. The crowd surged forward, pressing into the library doorway, drawn by the primal allure of buried treasure. It was grotesque. They were treating the violation of a man's privacy as a parlor trick, a magic show for their amusement. Mr. Clock fired up the drill. The high-pitched whine of the motor cut through the room, drowning out the music. He pressed the bit against the steel plate near the dial. Metal shrieked against metal, a piercing scream that made people cover their ears, yet they couldn't look away. Sparks flew, showering the Persian rug in a cascade of orange fire. Bradley stood by the locksmith, arms raised in triumph, basking in the noise and the destruction. "Drill it," he shouted over the screeching metal. "Tear it open. Let us see what the old miser was hiding from us all these years." Jasmine watched from her corner, her pulse steady. She checked her phone. The audio feed from the hidden room was live. The video feed was recording. Grandpa was watching the drill bore into the steel mere inches from the mechanism that would trigger his entrance. Bradley wanted a show. He wanted to reveal the secrets of the house. He was about to get exactly what he asked for, but the treasure inside wasn't gold. It was judgment. The shriek of the diamond-tipped bit biting into hardened steel rose to a fever pitch, a mechanical banshee wail that silenced even the drunken murmurs of the crowd. Sparks cascaded onto the Persian rug like a shower of molten gold, the only gold anyone would see that night. The guests flinched, covering their ears, but their eyes remained glued to the vault door, captives of their own avarice. Mr. Clock leaned his entire body weight into the machine, sweat dripping from his nose, until a final grinding shudder ran through the metal. With a hollow thud that vibrated through the floorboards, the drill punched through the locking mechanism. The locksmith killed the power. The sudden silence was heavier, more suffocating than the noise had been. A thin wisp of acrid gray smoke curled from the borehole, twisting in the air like a question mark. "You are up, boss," Clock grunted, stepping back and wiping grease from his forehead. Bradley didn't hesitate. He practically shoved the man aside, stepping into the spotlight of the library chandelier. His face was slick with perspiration and triumph. He reached out, grabbing the heavy brass handle now warm from the friction of the drill. He didn't just want to open it, he wanted to conquer it. He glanced back at the crowd, at Tyrone, who was leaning forward with bated breath, at the investors who were mentally calculating their cuts. "Witness the legacy," Bradley declared, his voice trembling with anticipation. He hauled on the handle. The heavy steel bolts retracted with a deep, resonant clunk that sounded like the tolling of a bell. With a groan of well-oiled hinges, the massive door swung outward. The crowd leaned in, as one organism, a collective inhalation of breath, expecting the glitter of bullion, the stacks of Depression-era cash, the velvet bags of diamonds. They saw nothing. The interior of the Titan safe was a gaping, dusty maw of darkness. It was cavernous and aggressively empty. There were no shelves lined with ingots. There were no hidden compartments bursting with bearer bonds. The emptiness seemed to spill out of the safe and infect the room, turning anticipation into confusion. Bradley froze, his smile petrifying into a rictus of horror. He blinked once, twice, as if his eyes were failing to render the reality before him. He scrambled forward, falling to his knees, thrusting his hands into the void, groping at the empty metal floor. "Where is it?" he hissed, his voice rising to a panic-stricken squeak. "Where is the money?" On the single center shelf, illuminated by the harsh overhead light, sat only two objects. The first was a disorganized stack of yellowing papers bound with a dry, cracking rubber band. Bradley snatched them up, his fingers tearing the edges in his haste. He rifled through them, desperate for a deed, a stock certificate, a bond. They were gambling markers. final notices from 1978, paid-off liens, receipts for lumber, trash. They were the financial scars of a life lived hard, kept as souvenirs of survival, possessing zero monetary value. He threw them onto the floor in disgust, the papers scattering like dead leaves. The second object sat charged and waiting. It was a sleek, modern iPad Pro, propped up on a small stand connected to a portable battery bank. The screen was dark, but a small green LED pulsed rhythmically in the corner, a heartbeat in the steel tomb. It was out of place, an alien artifact in the antique vault. Bradley stared at it, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't a treasure hoard. It was a stage. From the back of the room, Jasmine watched the color drain from her father's face. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She simply tapped a command on her phone. Inside the safe, the iPad screen suddenly flared to life. The brightness was blinding in the dim library. A video file maximized, filling the display. The crowd fell deathly silent as the audio speakers on the device kicked in, broadcasting a voice they had all dismissed as senile and gone. "Hello, Bradley." The voice on the iPad boomed, clear, strong, and utterly lucid. "I believe you are looking for something." The voice from the iPad cut through the stunned silence of the library, commanding and dripping with irony. "Pick them up." Bradley, the recording of Grandpa, boomed the volume, maximizing to fill the cavernous room. "You threw them away like trash, which is fitting since that is exactly how you treated this family. But I suggest you look closer. That stack is the only inheritance Tyrone is ever going to get." Bradley, still on his knees, looked down at the crumpled yellow papers scattered across the Persian rug. His hands shook as he reached out, snatching the top document. He smoothed it out against the cold steel floor of the safe. It wasn't a gambling marker from the 70s. It was a notice of federal tax lien dated 2 weeks ago. He squinted, his eyes widening as he scanned the dense legal jargon. Department of the Treasury Internal Revenue Service. Bradley read aloud, his voice cracking, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. Demand for payment. Entity, Tyrone Ventures, LLC. Outstanding balance, $2,400,000. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Bradley looked up, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. He grabbed the next page and the next. They were all the same: judgments, liens, foreclosure warnings on commercial properties Tyrone had supposedly managed. Tyrone stood by the easel, the blueprint of his vanity project looming behind him like a tombstone. The color drained from his face so fast it looked as if he had been physically struck. He swayed, gripping the edge of the easel for support. His secret shame, the shell company he had used to hide his gambling losses and launder his mismanagement, was not just exposed, it was the centerpiece of the evening. "That is impossible," Tyrone stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "Those files, they were supposed to be shredded. How did he get those?" The iPad answered him. "You thought you were clever, son." Grandpa's voice continued from the screen, his image leaning forward, eyes piercing through the lens. "You thought borrowing against the business to pay off bookies in Vegas was a victimless crime. But you used my address for the incorporation. You made this house the collateral." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The tuxedoed investors, the sharks who had been salivating over the demolition, suddenly took a collective step back. The atmosphere shifted instantly from a celebration of wealth to the scene of a financial contagious disease. "Wait a minute," the man in the expensive watch shouted from the back. "If the house is collateral for a $2 million tax lien, the title isn't clean. We can't develop on encumbered land. The IRS will seize the assets before we even break ground." Whispers erupted like wildfire. Fraud, bankruptcy, liability. The guests began to check their phones, signaling their drivers. The illusion of the Tyrone Plaza disintegrated in seconds. Bradley scrambled to his feet, clutching the papers to his chest as if he could physically hide the debt. "No, no, this is a mistake," he yelled, turning to the crowd, a desperate, manic grin plastered on his face. "We can fix this. The sale price covers the debt. We still have equity." But the sharks were already smelling blood. They weren't interested in fixing Tyrone's mess. They were interested in easy prey, and they had just realized they were dining with a corpse. "You lied to us, Bradley," one of the partners hissed, buttoning his jacket. "You said the title was unblemished. This is fraud." Tyrone looked at his wife, Serena. She was staring at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and realization. The Rio trip, the freedom, the money, it was all a lie. He wasn't rich, he was drowning, and he had tied an anchor to all of their ankles. Jasmine watched from the shadows, her face impassive. The bomb had detonated. Now it was time for the fallout. The iPad in the safe didn't just speak, it evolved. A wireless handshake initiated by Jasmine's phone sent a signal piercing through the secure network. The massive projection screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the glossy rendering of the Tyrone Plaza parking lot, suddenly glitched. The image of the glass and steel monstrosity distorted, fracturing into jagged lines of digital noise before blinking out entirely. The room plunged into semi-darkness, the only illumination coming from the glowing safe and the harsh beam of the projector cutting through the smoky air. Then the main screen flared back to life. It was no longer a static blueprint. It was a high-definition live feed. The image was crisp, projected 10 feet high, dominating the room like a deity. It showed a man sitting in a high-backed leather wheelchair, bathed in the warm amber glow of a desk lamp. He held a lit cigar in one hand, the cherry burning a bright, angry orange. Thick blue smoke curled around his face, framing a pair of eyes that were sharp, alert, and burning with a terrifying intelligence. It was Grandpa. Not the frail, confused invalid Bradley had mocked. Not the vegetable Tyrone had disregarded. This was the patriarch, the builder, the lion in winter. A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the room. A wine glass shattered somewhere near the buffet, the sound crisp and violent. Tyrone grabbed the edge of the dining table, his knuckles turning white, his knees buckling under the weight of a ghost coming back to life. He looked like he was witnessing a resurrection, and he was terrified of the judgment that came with it. The audio system previously used for the DJ's bass-heavy lounge tracks crackled with static. Then a voice boomed out surrounding them, coming from the ceiling, the walls, the very bones of the house. It was deep, gravelly, and dripping with absolute disdain. "Hello, vultures." Grandpa took a slow, deliberate drag from the cigar, exhaling a cloud of smoke that seemed to billow out of the screen and suffocate the ballroom. He leaned forward, the camera zooming in slightly, capturing the predatory glint in his eyes. "I apologize for the lack of hors d'oeuvres inside the safe. I know you were expecting gold bars to go with your vintage champagne, but I find that federal tax liens and evidence of felony fraud are much more nutritious for the soul. Don't you agree?" Bradley scrambled backward from the open safe as if it contained a radioactive core. He looked up at the giant screen, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, unable to form words. He looked around wildly, his eyes darting to the corners of the room, searching for the source of the feed. "Cut it!" Bradley shrieked, his voice cracking, pointing a trembling finger at the AV technician cowering behind the DJ booth. "Cut the feed! Turn it off! Kill the power!" The technician frantically tapped at his console, pulling sliders and hitting mute buttons, but nothing happened. Jasmine had locked the system out from her phone. The show was mandatory. "You can't turn me off, boy." Grandpa's voice thundered, shaking the floorboards. "I built this house. I wired this house. And right now I am watching you soil your imported Italian trousers in my library." The guests began to murmur, a rising tide of panic and confusion. They looked at the screen, then at the walls, realizing the background behind the old man wasn't a hospital room or a care facility. It was bookshelves, mahogany paneling, a distinct velvet wallpaper. It was a room that looked suspiciously like the architectural style of the house they were standing in. "Wait a minute," one of the investors said, his voice cutting through the din, pointing at the screen. "That molding. That is the same pattern as the hallway. He is here. He is inside the house." Grandpa smiled on the screen, a cold, shark-like baring of teeth that promised no mercy. Very good, he drawled. The rats are smarter than they look. Yes, I am here. I have been here the whole time, listening to you divide my assets, listening to you plan to bulldoze my life, listening to my own son sell his mother's future for a plane ticket to Rio and a gambling debt. On the screen, Grandpa turned his head slightly, looking off camera, then back at the lens. He raised the cigar in a mocking salute to the room full of traitors. You wanted a grand opening, you wanted a show. Well, welcome to the main event. I hope you kept your receipts, gentlemen, because the landlord is home and the rent is overdue. The high-definition feed on the projection screen flickered and died, plunging the ballroom into a sudden, suffocating darkness. The house music cut out instantly, leaving a silence so profound you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Panic rippled through the crowd, a nervous energy that sparked like static electricity. Then, a mechanical thunk echoed from the library loud as a gunshot. A single blinding spotlight snapped on from the ceiling. It didn't aim at the stage or the trembling Bradley. It cut through the gloom to focus intensely on the floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookcase on the far wall of the library. The wood groaned a deep vibrating rumble that shook the floorboards beneath the guests' feet. The crowd scrambled back, gasping as the massive shelving unit split down the center. It swung outward on hidden heavy-duty hydraulic hinges, revealing not a wall, but a brightly lit corridor lined with humming servers and banks of surveillance monitors. From the depths of this hidden fortress, Grandpa Elijah emerged. He was not the frail, vegetative invalid Bradley had described to the investors. He was not the confused old man Tyrone had dismissed. He wheeled himself forward with powerful, deliberate strokes, crossing the threshold from the shadows into the harsh light. He was dressed impeccably in a pristine three-piece white suit, sharp and tailored with a silk pocket square, flaring from his chest like a badge of authority. He looked like a king returning from exile to reclaim his throne. He did not come alone. Marching in step beside his wheelchair was the county sheriff, a towering figure in a tan uniform, his Stetson hat pulled low and his hand resting casually near his service weapon. Behind them, two uniformed deputies stepped out, blocking the library exit, their faces grim. The law hadn't just arrived, it had been waiting in the walls. Serena, who had been clutching Tyrone's arm for support, let out a sound that was half scream, half gasp. She pointed a trembling finger at the figure in white, her eyes bulging with a primal, superstitious terror. To her guilty mind, this wasn't a man. It was a specter rising from the grave she had mentally dug for him. "It is a ghost!" Serena shrieked, her voice piercing the silence. "He is dead. We buried him. It is a ghost!" The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin the color of ash. Her eyes rolled back in her head and her knees gave way. She collapsed into a heap of expensive fabric and denial, hitting the floor with a thud. Tyrone didn't even reach out to catch her. He was frozen, staring at his father with the look of a man watching his own executioner approach. Elijah stopped his chair in the center of the room, looking down at his unconscious daughter-in-law with an expression of cold indifference. He adjusted his cuffs, the gold links glinting in the spotlight. "I am no ghost, Serena," Elijah said, his voice gravelly and commanding, projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "I am the landlord, and I brought the sheriff to help you with your eviction." Elijah did not waste breath on a speech. He did not raise his voice to match the hysteria of the room. He simply wheeled himself forward until he was face to face with Bradley, the man who had spent the last year poisoning his soup and gaslighting his family. Bradley stood frozen on the stage, the diamond-tipped drill still resting at his feet like a monument to his own stupidity. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to spin one last lie about dementia or confusion, but the look in the old man's eyes stopped the words in his throat. It was the look of a judge who had already signed the death warrant. Elijah raised a single trembling finger and pointed it directly at Bradley's chest. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. "Audit," Elijah said. The word was spoken softly, yet it hit with the force of a physical blow. It was not a question. It was a command. It was the nuclear option. On that cue, the sheriff stepped forward, his boots heavy on the hardwood. He didn't walk, he swarmed. Two deputies rushed the stage from the wings, moving with the practiced efficiency of a tactical team. Before Bradley could even process the command, he was spun around and slammed face first against the polished mahogany of the dining table right next to the stack of fraudulent deeds. Bradley Parker, you are under arrest for grand larceny, elder abuse, wire fraud, and the embezzlement of trust assets. The sheriff announced, his voice booming over the stunned crowd. The click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the loudest sound in the room. Bradley struggled, his face pressed against the wood, shouting about mistakes and lawyers, but the deputies hauled him up like a sack of garbage. They didn't stop there. One of the officers reached under the table and pulled out the aluminum briefcase Bradley had accepted earlier that evening. He popped the latches, revealing the stacks of illicit cash to the room. "We also have you on tape accepting a bribe to defraud a federal housing zone," the sheriff added, snapping the case shut. "Courtesy of your niece's diligence." The effect on the room was instantaneous and chaotic. The investors, the developers, and the zoning commissioners, who had been sipping champagne moments ago, were now scrambling for the exits, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. They dropped their glasses, abandoned their plates, and shoved past each other to get to the doors, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of Bradley's schemes. No one wanted to be an accessory. No one wanted to be in the background of the police photos. Bradley was dragged off the stage, his heels dragging on the floor, his tuxedo rumpled and ruined. He looked wildly around the room, searching for an ally, for anyone to step in and stop the madness. His eyes locked with Tyrone's. "Do something!" Bradley screamed, spit flying from his mouth as they hauled him toward the front door. "Tell them, Tyrone. Tell them we had a deal." But Tyrone didn't move. He stood by the easel, paralyzed, watching his partner in crime being paraded out in chains. He knew that the word audit didn't just apply to Bradley. It applied to everyone. The IRS liens were still scattered on the floor of the safe, glowing under the spotlight. The lion wasn't done eating. He was just clearing the appetizers. Elijah watched Bradley disappear into the back of a squad car through the open front door, the flashing red and blue lights painting the ballroom in a surreal strobe light horror. He turned his wheelchair slowly, the rubber tires squeaking on the floor, and fixed his gaze on his son. "You are next," Elijah said calmly. The red and blue lights of the police cruisers were still washing over the ballroom walls when a man in a bespoke charcoal suit emerged from the same hidden corridor that Elijah had used. He did not look like the disheveled Mr. Sterling. He carried himself with the quiet, lethal confidence of a shark in deep water. This was Mr. Vance, Elijah's personal attorney for 40 years, a man whose hourly rate exceeded the annual income of most of the guests in the room. He walked to the center of the room, opened a leather folio, and placed a single heavy document on the table next to the diamond drill. "Please, everyone remain where you are," Vance said, his voice calm, but projecting effortlessly to the back of the room. "There is the matter of the contract signed this evening." The developers and investors, who had been inching toward the door, froze. They looked at the lawyer, sensing a final blow. Tyrone, still paralyzed by the easel, looked from his father to Vance, his eyes darting with the desperate hope that perhaps somehow the sale could still be salvaged to pay his debts. Mr. Bradley Parker attempted to sell this property under the power of attorney, claiming Mr. Elijah was mentally incompetent. Vance continued adjusting his glasses. "However, that power of attorney is a forgery. But even if it were real, it would be irrelevant, because Elijah does not own this house." A confused murmur rippled through the remaining guests. Tyrone blinked, his mouth falling open. "What are you talking about?" Tyrone stammered. "My father built this house. It is in his name." It was until 5 years ago Vance corrected, his tone icy, anticipating that his family might one day prioritize greed over legacy. Mr. Elijah transferred the deed, the land, and all associated assets into an irrevocable entity known as the Elijah Charity Trust. The property is legally a sanctuary for at-risk youth and historical preservation. It cannot be sold. It cannot be leveraged. and it certainly cannot be bulldozed for a parking lot. Vance turned his gaze toward Jasmine, who was still standing in the shadows, her face impassive. And the sole trustee, the only person on this earth with the legal authority to sign a document regarding this estate, is not Tyrone. It is not Bradley, it is Miss Jasmine. All eyes turned to Jasmine. She stepped forward into the light, the black clothes she wore no longer looking like morning attire, but like the uniform of a judge. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat, she simply nodded to Vance. The revelation hit Tyrone like a physical blow. He had spent years ignoring his daughter, belittling her, treating her as a servant, only to find out she had held the keys to the kingdom the entire time. But that brings us to the financial fallout, Vance said, turning back to the developers. Mr. Parker signed a performance guarantee with your firm, did he not? A clause stating that if the title was not delivered clear and free within 24 hours, the seller would be liable for triple the deposit as a penalty for commercial bad faith. The lead developer, a man with a face like tanned leather, nodded slowly, a cruel smile forming on his lips. He realized he wasn't getting the land, but he was about to get paid. Yes, he said. The deposit was $1.2 million. Triple damages would be $3.6 million, payable immediately. Vance closed his folio with a snap. Precisely. Since Bradley signed that contract fraudulently representing himself as the owner, that debt does not fall on the trust. It falls on him personally. And since he and his wife Keisha share assets, and since Tyrone here is listed as a guarantor on Bradley's business filings, the liability chain is quite clear. Vance looked at Tyrone, whose knees finally gave out. He slid down the easel, sitting on the floor in a heap of ruin. The trust is secure. Vance finished picking up the briefcase. But gentlemen, feel free to liquidate the personal assets of Mr. Parker and Mr. Tyrone to recover your losses. I believe they have a few cars, a condo in the city, and perhaps a plane ticket to Rio that can be refunded. The house, however, stays with Jasmine. The room was a tableau of destruction, but Jasmine had one final nail to drive into the coffin of her father's deception. The financial ruin Mr. Vance had detailed was abstract, a matter of numbers and contracts. The betrayal she held in her hand was visceral. It was personal. As the deputies began to escort the weeping Bradley toward the door, Jasmine raised her phone. She didn't need a microphone. The acoustics of the grand ballroom carried sound perfectly. She tapped the screen. The recording from the morning sunroom played, amplified by the silence of the stunned crowd. Tell Sheila to get her passport ready. Tyrone's recorded voice sneered, the arrogant tone contrasting sharply with the man currently cowering on the floor. We are booking the first flight to Rio. No, Serena doesn't get a dime. The old woman is clueless. I am taking my half, paying you, and I am gone. Tyrone scrambled backward, his heels sliding on the polished wood, his eyes bulging as his own voice condemned him. He looked toward the back of the room where Sheila, the woman in the red dress, had been standing, but the spot was empty. She had slipped away the moment the handcuffs clicked on Bradley, leaving her lover to face the music alone. On the floor nearby, Serena stirred. The smelling salts administered by a helpful guest had brought her back just in time to hear her life disintegrate. She sat up, blinking, her expensive hairdo disheveled. The words from the recording echoed in her mind. Clueless. Doesn't get a dime. Rio. The realization hit her not with sadness, but with the force of a physical blow. She had stood by him. She had ignored his drinking. She had signed whatever papers he put in front of her. She had even helped him gaslight her own daughter, all to secure a comfortable retirement. And he had planned to discard her like a used wrapper. Tyrone, Serena whispered, her voice trembling. Rio. With Sheila. Tyrone held up his hands, shaking his head frantically. Serena, baby, listen to me. It is a deep fake. Jasmine doctored it. She is trying to tear us apart. You know I love you. The lie was so pathetic, so transparent, that it acted as the spark to the powder keg of Serena's humiliation. A lifetime of repression, of maintaining appearances, of smiling through the insults, finally detonated. She let out a scream that was not human. It was the sound of a wounded animal cornered in a trap. She didn't stand up gracefully. She launched herself. Serena flew across the few feet separating them, landing on Tyrone with the fury of a banshee. Her manicured nails, usually reserved for holding wine glasses, became talons. She clawed at his face, raking deep lines down his cheeks. She grabbed his silk tie, the one she had bought him for Christmas, and twisted it, choking the excuses out of his throat. "You bastard!" she shrieked, slamming his head against the floorboards. "You were going to leave me. After everything I did, I lied for you, I stole for you." The guests watched in horrified fascination as the facade of the respectable family dissolved into a brawl. Tyrone flailed, trying to protect his eyes, shouting for help. It took 2 deputies to pull her off him. They had to physically drag Serena back, her chest, heaving, her eyes wild and unseeing. She spat at him, a glob of saliva hitting his ruined tie. "I hope they bury you under the jail, Tyrone," she screamed, as the officer restrained her. "I hope you rot." Jasmine watched the disintegration of her parents' marriage with cold detachment. There was no pity in her heart, only the grim satisfaction of truth finally finding the light. She looked at her grandfather, who sat silently in his wheelchair, watching the chaos he had orchestrated. He didn't smile. He simply nodded, a general acknowledging a battle won. The house was clean. The vermin were exposing themselves. And the night was not over yet. With the architects of the conspiracy either in handcuffs or bleeding on the floor, the spotlight shifted to the last remaining pillar of the failed coup. Keisha stood near the buffet table, clutching her designer clutch like a life preserver. She had watched her husband Bradley being dragged away without offering a single word of protest. She had watched her father Tyrone get mauled by her mother without intervening. Her survival instinct was paramount, and it told her that the ship was sinking fast. She needed a lifeboat, and she decided her best bet was to play the role of the innocent, manipulated granddaughter. She rushed toward Elijah's wheelchair, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood. She threw herself to her knees beside him, grabbing his hand with both of hers. Her face was wet with tears that had arrived suspiciously late in the evening. "Grandpa, please, you have to believe me," Keisha sobbed, her voice pitching up into a shrill wail. "I didn't know. Bradley told me he was helping you. He said you wanted to sell. I am a victim here too. He lied to me just like he lied to everyone else. Don't cut me off. I am your favorite. I am your little girl." Elijah looked down at her. He didn't pull his hand away immediately. He simply let it rest there, a cold, dead weight in her grip. He studied her face, looking for a trace of the child he had once bounced on his knee, but all he saw was the greed that had consumed her. "You didn't know," Elijah repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Is that why you spent $74,000 on my supplementary American Express card in the last 3 weeks? Was that you being a victim, Keisha? Or was that you trying to max out the credit limit before the house sold?" Keisha froze. Her sobbing stopped instantly, replaced by a look of deer-in-headlights terror. "I tracked every purchase," Elijah continued, his eyes hard as flint. "The flight to Paris, the spa treatments, the vintage Cartier bracelet you are wearing right now. You weren't grieving my decline. You were celebrating my funeral in advance." He pulled his hand from hers and pointed to the table where the fraudulent documents still lay. "Put it back," Elijah commanded. Keisha blinked, confused. "Put what back?" "Everything," Elijah said. "The earrings, the bracelet, the necklace, that bag. Everything you bought with my money while you waited for me to die. Take it off. Now." Keisha looked around the room. The remaining guests, the police officers, the lawyer, everyone was watching. The humiliation was absolute. "Grandpa, you can't be serious," she whispered, clutching her wrist. "People are watching." "I am very serious," Elijah replied. "You wanted to live the high life on my dime. Now you can pay the bill. If you walk out that door with stolen property, the sheriff adds grand larceny to your husband's indictment. Is that a Chanel bag worth a felony record?" Keisha trembled. Slowly, with shaking fingers, she unclasped the diamond bracelet. It hit the table with a heavy clink. Next came the earrings, pulled roughly from her lobes. She unhooked the necklace, the gold shimmering under the spotlight, before joining the pile. Finally, she placed the designer handbag on the table. She stood up stripped of her armor, looking small and pathetic in her couture dress that suddenly seemed like a costume. "You are cruel," she hissed, her face blotchy and ruined. "I am just balancing the books," Elijah said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "You walked in here thinking you were royalty. You are leaving as a pauper. Go call a cab, Keisha. Your Uber account was linked to my card too, and I just canceled it." Keisha let out a strangled cry of frustration and ran for the door, her heels slipping on the polished floor, fleeing into the night without a husband, without a fortune, and without a ride home. Jasmine watched her go, feeling the final weight of the family's betrayal lift from her shoulders. The house was empty of traitors. The purge was complete. The commotion near the front entrance escalated into a chaotic struggle as the deputies forcefully maneuvered Bradley toward the door. He was not surrendering with dignity. The facade of the suave, untouchable real estate tycoon had completely shattered, revealing the desperate, snarling con artist beneath. He dug the heels of his expensive Italian loafers into the Persian rug, twisting his body violently in a futile attempt to break the officer's grip. His face a contorted mask of sweat, spit, and unadulterated fury. His wild eyes scanned the room, bypassing the ruins of the party, until they locked onto Jasmine, who stood watching him with the impassive stillness of a judge delivering a verdict. "It was you," Bradley screamed, straining against the handcuffs until his wrists bled, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You planned this. You set me up. This is entrapment. You fed me the wrong info. You manipulated the old man." He lunged toward her, dragging the deputies a few steps forward before they jerked him back with professional force. "You think you won? You think this is over? I will sue you. I will sue this entire family into the ground. You are nothing but a jealous little witch who couldn't handle that. I was the favorite." Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped forward, moving into his personal space with a slow, deliberate grace that silenced the remaining onlookers. The deputies, sensing the shift in power, paused for a brief second, tightening their hold on the prisoner, but allowing the confrontation. Jasmine looked at the man who had tormented her for years, who had treated her grandfather like livestock, and her home like an ATM. She saw the abject terror behind his rage, the dawning realization that his life of unearned luxury was incinerated. She leaned in close, her face inches from his ear, intimate and terrifying. The air between them crackled with tension. "I warned you, Bradley." Jasmine whispered, her voice soft, steady, and heavy with the weight of her victory. "I told you at dinner. I told you when you broke the plate. You don't understand real value. You don't understand legacy. You looked at this house and saw a commission check. You looked at my grandfather and saw an expiration date." She pulled back, slightly, locking eyes with him, her gaze piercing through his panic to the hollow core of his soul. "You never understood assets, Bradley. You never understood equity. You are not a developer. You are not a visionary. You are just a third-rate broker with a fake watch and a stolen suit. And now you are a felon." Bradley's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The insult struck him harder than a physical blow because it was the absolute truth. He slumped in the deputy's grip, the fight draining out of him instantly as the crushing reality of his future federal prison bankruptcy, total disgrace, crashed down upon him. "Get him out of my house," Jasmine said, dismissing him without looking back. The deputies shoved him through the open doorway. The cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and justice. Bradley was manhandled down the stone steps, past the shocked neighbors who had gathered on the sidewalk to watch the spectacle, and stuffed unceremoniously into the back of the waiting cruiser. As the heavy door slammed shut, sealing him inside the cage, Jasmine felt a profound ringing silence settle over the foyer. The parasite had been removed. The house could finally breathe again. The silence in the ballroom was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a battlefield after the cannons had stopped firing. Elijah did not look at the guests. He looked at the three people left standing in the wreckage of their own greed. Tyrone bleeding and disheveled from his wife's assault. Serena, her makeup streaked with tears of rage and ruin. Keisha shivering without her jewelry, looking like a child caught stealing candy. Elijah checked his pocket watch. It was a gold heirloom, the only real gold in the room. He snapped it shut with a sound that echoed like a gavel. 30 minutes, Elijah said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. I am giving you exactly 30 minutes to remove your personal effects from my property. Anything left after that mark will be donated to charity or burned. I do not care which. Serena started to protest, her voice a thin, pathetic wail. Dad, please, where will we go? It is the middle of the night. We have nowhere. I suggest a motel, Elijah replied, turning his wheelchair away from them, presenting his back to their pleas. Or perhaps the street. You were planning to put me in a state facility and Jasmine in a homeless shelter. I think the pavement is a generous compromise for people who tried to sell my life out from under me. Jasmine stepped forward. She held a roll of heavy-duty black contractor bags. She ripped them off one by one, the plastic snapping loudly in the quiet room. She tossed one to her father, one to her mother, and one to her sister. They landed at their feet like gauntlets. Use these, Jasmine said, her voice devoid of emotion. Don't bother with the designer suitcases. Those were bought with the company credit card, which means they belong to the trust. You leave with what you can carry in a sack. The humiliation was total. Under the watchful eyes of the sheriff's deputies and the remaining stunned guests, the family began to scramble. They did not pack with dignity. They looted their own lives. Tyrone limped up the stairs, stuffing his cheap suits and half-empty liquor bottles into the plastic sack. Serena swept her vanity table clear, dumping expensive creams and perfumes into the bag with a clatter of glass, weeping as she realized she had no home for them. Keisha ran to her room, grabbing shoes and clothes, blindly sobbing with a dry, heaving sound. Jasmine stood at the bottom of the grand staircase, checking her phone. She was the timekeeper of their exile. 20 minutes. 10 minutes. She watched them drag their lives down the steps in garbage bags. They looked like refugees of their own making. There was no pride left, no arrogance. Oh, just the desperate scurrying motion of rats caught in the light. Time is up, Jasmine announced, her voice echoing in the foyer. They huddled by the front door, clutching their black plastic sacks. They looked at the house, at the warmth and the light they had forfeited. They looked at Elijah, who sat with his back to them, refusing to grant them even a final glare. He was done with them. Get out, Jasmine said, opening the heavy oak door. The night air was biting cold. Tyrone stepped out first, head hung low, a broken man. Serena followed, shivering in her thin dress, her heels clicking on the stone for the last time. Keisha lingered for a split second, looking at Jasmine with eyes full of hate, before stepping into the darkness. Jasmine slammed the door shut. The heavy latch clicked into place, a sound of finality that sealed the house against the rot that had infested it for so long. She leaned her forehead against the wood and exhaled. It was done. The parasites were gone, and for the first time in years, the air inside felt clean. The heavy oak door resonated with a finality that vibrated through the stone steps beneath their feet. Tyrone, Serena, and Keisha stood on the welcome mat of the home they had plotted to steal, clutching their garbage bags like refugees from a fallen kingdom. The silence of the night was broken only by the rhythmic mechanical grinding of a winch. Tyrone looked up, his eyes widening in horror. The driveway, usually occupied by his pristine leased Mercedes S-Class, was now dominated by a flatbed tow truck. The amber warning lights strobed against the brick facade of the house, painting their defeat in rotating shades of yellow and black. A burly man in a reflective vest was securing chains around the rear axle of the luxury sedan. Hey, Tyrone shouted, dropping his bag and sprinting toward the truck, his limp forgotten in the face of losing his last status symbol. What are you doing? That is my car. Put it down. The driver didn't even look up. He yanked the lever and the Mercedes groaned as it was hauled up the ramp, its tires screeching in protest against the asphalt. Repossession order. The driver grunted, spitting onto the driveway. Got a call an hour ago. Anonymous tip said the vehicle was at risk of flight. Said the owner was planning a one-way trip to Rio. We don't take chances with assets this valuable. Tyrone froze. Jasmine. She hadn't just recorded the call. She had forwarded the itinerary to the lenders. She had stripped him of his getaway vehicle before he even packed his bags. This is a mistake, Tyrone pleaded, grabbing the driver's arm. I have the money. The wire transfer is coming tomorrow. Tell it to the bank, the driver said, shaking him off. Or tell it to Rocco. The paperwork lists him as a secondary lien holder. The name of the loan shark acted like a taser. Tyrone recoiled, his face pale. The driver climbed into the cab, the engine roared to life, and the truck pulled away, dragging the last vestige of Tyrone's ego into the darkness. Serena shivered her thin cocktail dress, offering no protection against the biting wind. Her hair, usually sprayed into helmet-like perfection, was beginning to deflate. Call a car, Keisha. Serena snapped, her voice shrill with panic. Just get us out of here. I don't care where we go. The Hilton, the Four Seasons, just fix this. Keisha fumbled for her phone, her acrylic nails tapping frantically on the screen. She opened the rideshare app, selected a luxury SUV, and hit confirm. The processing wheel spun for a second, then turned red. Payment declined. She frowned, swiping to a different card. The Platinum Amex. Declined. She tried the emergency visa. Declined. What is taking so long? Serena hissed, hugging herself. It is not working. Keisha stammered, her thumb hitting the screen harder, as if force would generate credit. It says the cards are invalid. All of them. Tyrone stared at the empty driveway. Dad, he whispered. He didn't just kick us out. He liquidated us. He canceled the authorized user accounts. We don't have a dime. Keisha looked at her phone, her lifeline to the world, which was now just a glowing brick. The realization washed over her. She couldn't call a ride, she couldn't book a hotel, she couldn't even buy a bottle of water. Then the sky opened up. It didn't start with a drizzle. It began as a deluge. Freezing rain sheeted down, soaking them to the bone in seconds. It plastered Tyrone's cheap suit to his frame, ruined Serena's silk dress, and turned Keisha's mascara into black tears running down her cheeks. They stood there, three figures in the driveway of a mansion that was no longer theirs, holding bags of trash, drenched and destitute. There was no one to call, no one to save them. Walk, Tyrone said, his voice broken. Walk where Keisha cried. Away, Tyrone replied, turning toward the main road. Just away. They trudged down the long, winding driveway, the gravel crunching under their expensive, impractical shoes. The rain washed away the last of their pretense, leaving them as they truly were, cold, wet, and empty. Behind them, the lights of the house remained warm and golden, a fortress secured against the storm, ruled by a lion and his granddaughter. 3 months later, the abrasive orange jumpsuit sat awkwardly on Bradley's frame, a stark and humiliating contrast to the bespoke Italian wool he had worn like armor for a decade. The air in Cell Block D did not smell of vintage leather and expensive cologne. It reeked of industrial disinfectant, stale sweat, and despair. Bradley sat on the edge of a thin, lumpy mattress, staring at the concrete floor, his knees bouncing with a nervous energy he could no longer suppress. The arrogance was gone, shaved away along with his hair, leaving behind a pale, shivering man who jumped at the sound of a closing gate. He was not in a minimum security facility where white-collar criminals worked on their tennis game. Because of the bribery charges involving a federal official and the predatory nature of his schemes against vulnerable seniors, the judge had made an example of him. He was in general population, and his reputation had arrived long before he did. A shadow fell over his bunk. Bradley flinched, looking up into the face of a man named Marcus, a towering inmate with forearms the size of tree trunks. Marcus didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which was somehow worse. Behind him stood 2 other men, their expressions hard and unforgiving. I got a letter from my auntie yesterday. Marcus said, his voice low and rumbling like a distant subway train. She said she finally got her deed back. Said some fancy lawyer fixed the paperwork that a snake real estate broker messed up. You know anything about that, Bradley? Bradley swallowed hard, his throat dry. I don't know what you mean. I was just a consultant. Don't lie to me, Marcus said, stepping closer. You are the guy who targeted the South Side. You're the one who forged signatures to evict families so you could build condos nobody could afford. My auntie almost ended up in a shelter because of paperwork you filed. The other men stepped in, boxing Bradley into the corner. There was no violence, not yet. It was the psychological pressure of knowing he was surrounded by the very people he had treated as statistics on a spreadsheet. They were no longer numbers, they were flesh and blood, and they were angry. We made sure your commissary account is empty, Marcus whispered. Consider it a transaction fee. And don't bother going to the yard today. The boys from the old neighborhood are running a seminar on property values and you are the guest speaker. They walked away, leaving Bradley trembling. He had spent his life stepping on the little guy, never realizing that one day he would be locked in a cage with them. Later that afternoon, during mail call, a guard tossed a single envelope onto his bunk. It wasn't a letter from Keisha. She hadn't written once. It was an official correspondence from the state licensing board. Bradley tore it open with shaking fingers. The letterhead was embossed, a cruel reminder of the world he used to inhabit. The words were brief and clinical. Due to his conviction on multiple counts of fraud and grand larceny, his real estate broker's license was permanently revoked. Furthermore, the Bar Association had issued an immediate disbarment. He was banned for life from practicing law, selling property, or holding any position of financial trust. He stared at the paper. It was over. Even if he survived prison, he would emerge with nothing. No career, no reputation, no skills other than lying, and now everyone knew the truth. He crumpled the letter in his fist and let it drop to the filthy floor, burying his face in his hands, as the reality of his eternal ruin finally set in. He was not a shark anymore. He was just bait. The auction gavel fell on the front lawn of Tyrone and Serena's colonial suburban home, signaling the end of their facade. The sound didn't echo like a victory. It thudded like dirt hitting a coffin. The proceeds from the liquidation didn't go into a secret account for a tropical retirement. Every cent went directly to the IRS to satisfy the federal liens and to a man named Rocco, who sat in a tinted sedan across the street, watching to ensure his principal and interest were paid in full. Tyrone watched the movers haul away his leather recliner, the symbol of his lazy Sundays, followed by Serena's vanity table. They stood on the curb, not with designer luggage, but with cardboard boxes waiting for a city bus that would take them to a zip code they used to mock at dinner parties. Across town, the fluorescent lights of the burger barn hummed with a headache-inducing flicker that never stopped. Keisha wiped down a sticky table with a rag that smelled of bleach and stale onions. Her acrylic nails were long gone, replaced by chipped polish and hands red from scrubbing pots. A customer in a grease-stained mechanic's shirt snapped his fingers at her from the corner booth. "Hey, honey, more coffee over here," he barked, not even looking up from his phone. "And make it quick." Keisha flinched. 6 months ago, she would have had this man fired for looking at her the wrong way. She would have called him peasant trash. Now she swallowed the bile rising in her throat and forced a smile that felt like chewing glass. "Coming right up, sir," she said, her voice hollow. She poured the coffee, watching the dark liquid swirl, remembering how she used to command Jasmine to fetch her water. The irony was a heavy, suffocating weight she carried on her tray. She was the help now. She was the one cleaning up messes, and the tips didn't even cover her share of the electric bill. The apartment was a 2-room box located directly above a 24-hour laundromat. The floorboards vibrated constantly with the rumble of industrial dryers, and the air permanently smelled of damp lint and exhaust fumes. There was no dining room. There was a small, scarred laminate table squeezed between the kitchenette and the pull-out couch where Keisha slept. Dinner was instant noodles boiled in a pot they had bought at a thrift store. The steam rose, fogging up the single window that looked out onto a brick wall. "You said we were set," Serena hissed, stabbing her plastic fork into the noodles. "You said Bradley had it handled. You said we were going to Rio. You looked me in the eye and told me to pack for the beach." Tyrone slammed his cup down, broth splashing onto his stained shirt. "Shut up, Serena." He snapped, his eyes bloodshot and weary. "You were the one who signed the papers without reading them. You were the one who wanted the country club membership we couldn't afford. You spent the money just as fast as I borrowed it. Don't act like a victim. You were driving the getaway car." "I hate you!" Keisha screamed from the couch, throwing a pillow at her father. "I hate both of you. You ruined my life. I should be in Paris. I should be married to a rich man. Instead, I smell like French fries and poverty because you two are idiots." The arguing escalated, a nightly ritual of venom and regret. They were three scorpions trapped in a bottle, stinging each other over and over again, with nowhere left to run. There was no rich grandfather to bail them out. No Jasmine to bully into silence. They had nothing but each other, and that was the cruelest punishment of all. The morning sun did not just rise over the estate, it reclaimed it. Golden light poured through the bay windows of the breakfast nook, dissolving the lingering shadows of the previous night's treachery. The house was no longer a stage for a con artist's play or a prison for an old man pretending to be a ghost. It was simply a home again. The air smelled of fresh coffee and frying bacon, a stark, grounding contrast to the scents of stale champagne and anxiety that had permeated the walls for months. Jasmine set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the table. She moved with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. There was no one to critique her plating, no one to demand she scrub the floor, no one to whisper poison in the hallways. Grandpa Elijah sat at the head of the table, not in the shadows of his secret room, but in the full embrace of the morning light. He had traded his white suit for a comfortable cardigan, and the wheelchair was pushed back slightly, allowing him to cross his legs. He wasn't the invalid anymore. He was the patriarch at rest. He took a sip of coffee black and sighed, a long, deep exhalation that seemed to release the last of the tension from his lungs. "It is quiet," Elijah observed, his voice rough but warm. "I had forgotten what this house sounded like without the constant hum of greed. It used to sing like this when your grandmother was alive. Just the birds and the wind." "It is peaceful," Jasmine agreed, taking the seat to his right. She looked at the empty chairs where her parents and sister used to sit. The absence of their toxicity felt like a physical weight had been lifted from the room. Elijah reached for a leather folder resting near the sugar bowl. He opened it, revealing a document printed on heavy, cream-colored bond paper. He uncapped his fountain pen, the same one he had given Jasmine years ago, the one she had used to sign the disappearing deed. His hand did not shake. "I built the foundation," Jasmine, Elijah said, looking at her with eyes that were clear and full of pride. "I laid the bricks. I wired the circuits. I fought the wars to keep it standing. But a house cannot just be a fortress. It has to be a future." He signed the bottom of the document with a flourish, the nib scratching audibly against the paper. He turned the folder around and slid it across the table to her. "This transfers full executive control of the Elijah Charity Trust to you, effective immediately," he said. "Not just as a trustee, but as the director. I am officially retiring. I am done fighting sharks. I want to spend my remaining years sitting in the garden reading my books and knowing that the legacy is in hands that actually built Calluses, protecting it." Jasmine looked at the signature. It was the passing of the torch. It was the ultimate validation. "You are sure?" Jasmine asked. "I have never been more sure of anything," Elijah replied, smiling. "You were the only one who didn't want my money. You just wanted my safety. That makes you the only one qualified to spend it. Now eat your eggs. We have a lot of work to do. We have a shelter to run, and I believe you mentioned something about turning the ballroom into a community library." Jasmine picked up her fork. The nightmare was over. The sun was up, and for the first time the future looked exactly like she wanted it to be. Jasmine traced the embossed seal on the trust documents, the heavy cream paper cool beneath her fingertips. The silence in the kitchen was comfortable yet heavy with the ghosts of the previous night. She looked up at Elijah. He was watching the cardinals bickering over the bird feeder outside the bay window, his expression contemplative, like a man who had surgically removed a tumor from his life and was now assessing the scar. Grandpa Jasmine started, her voice hesitant, breaking the morning quiet. You cut them off completely. Dad, Mom, Keisha, they are your flesh and blood. Does it hurt? Elijah turned his gaze back to her. His eyes were dry, seasoned by years of watching his family decay from the inside out. He placed his ceramic coffee cup down with a deliberate, steady hand, the sound sharp against the wood. It hurts like a severed limb, Jasmine. Elijah admitted, his voice low and gravelly, carrying the weight of his years. But a gangrenous limb will kill the whole body if you do not amputate it. I spent 40 years thinking that biology was a binding contract. I thought that because I gave Tyrone life, he owed me loyalty. I thought that because I built this roof, they would respect the foundation. I was wrong. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his face serious and etched with hard-won wisdom. But I learned the hard way that DNA is just a chemical code. It dictates the color of your eyes and the shape of your nose. It does not dictate your character. It does not guarantee love. I watched my own son look at me and see nothing but a dollar sign. I watched my granddaughters steal from me to buy trinkets while I was pretending to be dying. That is not family. That is parasitism. Jasmine listened, absorbing the harsh truth. She had felt the lingering guilt of turning against her parents, the societal pressure that said you must honor them no matter what, but hearing him speak validated her actions. It washed away the doubt. Family is not the blood that runs in your veins. Elijah continued, his voice rising with conviction, his eyes locking onto hers. Family are the people who stand by you when the storm comes. Family are the ones who hold the umbrella, not the ones who try to sell it to the highest bidder. When I was in that wheelchair playing the part of a vegetable, I saw who they really were. They were vultures circling a carcass. But you were the only one who wiped my face. You were the only one who read to me when you thought I could not hear. You protected me when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His grip was warm, strong, and alive. You are my family, Jasmine, not because of your last name, but because of your heart. You earned your seat at this table. They forfeited theirs. Never let anyone tell you that you owe them something just because you share a genetic history. You owe your loyalty to those who treat you with dignity. That is the only currency that matters in this house now. Jasmine squeezed his hand back, tears pricking her eyes. The last vestiges of guilt evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of belonging. She was not the black sheep anymore. She was the shepherd. Thank you, Grandpa, she whispered. Elijah smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling, the shadow of the patriarch replaced by the warmth of a grandfather. Do not thank me. Just promise me one thing. When you turn the ballroom into a community library, make sure the fiction section is far away from the biography section. I have had enough storytelling and lies in this house to last a lifetime. Now finish your breakfast. We have a legacy to build, and this time we are building it with the right materials. The library was finally silent, but it was not the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a vault that had been successfully secured. The diamond-tipped drill was gone. The shattered china was swept away. The air no longer smelled of desperation and cheap cologne. It smelled of old paper leather and the rich peat-heavy aroma of a 50-year-old single malt scotch. Jasmine stood by the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows across her face. She was no longer the girl in the oversized sweater trying to disappear into the drywall. She wore the mantle of authority as comfortably as she wore her grandfather's vintage blazer. She held a crystal tumbler in her hand, the amber liquid catching the firelight. Across the room, the heavy steel door of the Titan's safe stood open, no longer a source of anxiety, but a symbol of transparency. Inside the iPad was dark, its job done. The stack of tax liens had been filed away as evidence. The only thing left on the shelf was the legacy she had fought to protect. She took a slow sip of the scotch. It burned pleasantly, a warming reminder that she was alive, she was safe, and she had won. She walked slowly toward the center of the room, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor that her father had tried to sell out from under her feet. She stopped in front of the camera, her gaze direct, unwavering, and dangerous. She looked through the lens, addressing not just the ghosts of her family, but every person who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cast aside. They called me invisible. Jasmine said, her voice a low, smooth purr. They thought because I didn't scream, I didn't have a voice. They thought because I served their dinner, I didn't know the recipe for poison. They mistook my patience for submission. She swirled the liquid in her glass, watching the vortex. My father thought he was the king because he sat at the head of the table. Bradley thought he was the shark because he knew how to wear a suit. Keisha thought she was the princess because she knew how to spend money. They forgot the most important rule of the jungle: the loudest animal is usually the one getting eaten. Jasmine raised the glass higher, a toast to the wreckage she had left in her wake. You see, silence isn't empty, it is full of answers. While they were talking, I was listening. While they were spending, I was saving. While they were plotting, I was recording. They built a house of cards on a foundation of lies. I just waited for the wind to change. A small, enigmatic smile played on her lips. It was the smile of the one holding the detonator after the dust has settled. So here is a piece of advice for the next time you think you can walk over the quiet girl in the corner. Don't. Never underestimate the person who doesn't say a word. Maybe they aren't weak. Maybe they aren't scared. Maybe they are just waiting for you to get in range. They aren't hiding. They are just reloading. Cheers. Jasmine tipped the glass to her lips and drank. The firelight flared one last time in her eyes. The screen cut to absolute black. In the darkness, a heavy metallic sound echoed, final and absolute. Clank. This story illustrates that silence should never be mistaken for weakness. While Jasmine's family was consumed by greed and arrogance, treating her as invisible, she was actually their most dangerous observer. It teaches us that true power lies not in being the loudest in the room, but in the patience to wait for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Furthermore, it redefines family, proving that shared blood does not demand loyalty when respect is absent. Ultimately, those who underestimate the quiet ones often face the harshest consequences when the tables finally turn. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, hit like and subscribe for more satisfying stories of revenge.